Ok. Davvero davvero di ottima qualità questi guanti. Vi faccio vedere il problema dei mechanics.
Okay, thank you.
Buchino, dopo un giorno di utilizzo.
All right. Good
Oggi
morning,
c'è il
ladies and
verdetto. No,
gentlemen.
le ultime botte ci sono oggi.
All right, your next witness,
Oh, mi sono spente le
We call
cuffie.
Dr. Richard Gilbert, Your Honor.
Dr. Gilbert.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this case under penalty of law?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr.
Testimonia
Gilbert.
anche Amber.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name for the record?
Richard Stephen Gilbert.
And what is your occupation?
I am an orthopedic surgeon and I have a subspecialty training in surgery of the hand and upper extremity.
Dr. Gilbert, where do you work currently?
I currently work in New York and Long Island at Northwell Health.
And you mentioned you have a specialty. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your specialty is?
So after medical school, I trained in orthopedic surgery and I did an orthopedic surgery residency. And for a year thereafter, I did a hand and upper extremity surgery resident fellowship. And so my
Medico della mano?
practice for the past 22 years has been limited to surgery of the hand, wrist, and elbow.
And I think you may have gotten ahead of me there, but how long have you been practicing?
22 years?
Okay. What percentage of your practice over the past 22
È per lei o
years
per lui questo
has
medico?
involved surgery?
Approximately 1/3 of my practice.
Okay. And other than that 1/3 that involves surgery, what does the rest of your practice entail?
The rest of my practice entails some academic work, but mostly seeing patients in the office, seeing them either pre or post-operatively. A large portion of hand
lui?
surgeons treat patients non-operatively.
Non può essere per lei, è troppo furbo.
In terms of the surgeries that you do, can you describe for us the types of surgeries that you will perform?
So again, I limit my practice to hand, wrist, and elbow. I would say approximately 75% or so of my practice is limited to the hand itself. And this really varies from anything from conditions like carpal tunnel syndrome to tendinitis to injuries such as amputations,
Ma certo, nessuno.
fractures, sharp lacerations, etc.
Over the course of your 22 years of practice, how many surgeries would you estimate you've performed?
I perform about 300 to 400 surgeries a year, so a rough estimate would be approximately 10,000, maybe a little less.
Solo?
Where are you currently licensed?
Davvero?
In
Adi?
New York.
And how long have you been licensed in New York?
Immagino, Anna.
I've been licensed in New York since 1994, so that would be 28 years.
And do you have any certifications?
Yes.
And can you tell us about those?
I am board certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery, and I have a Certificate of Added Qualifications in Surgery of the Hand from the American Society for Surgery of the Hand.
When did you receive your board certification?
2002.
Esperto medico
And
della
can you
mano.
describe for us what current positions you hold?
I am currently an assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at Northwell Health, and I'm also the president-elect of the New York Society for Surgery of the Hand.
In what professional organizations are you a member?
I'm a member of multiple orthopedic organizations, including the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery, the American Association of Orthopedic Surgery, and the
Non lo so,
American
io penso-
Society for Surgery of the Hand, as well as the New York Society for Surgery of the Hand.
Have you published any articles in your field?
Yes, I have.
Have you testified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
Can you ballpark for us how many times?
Certainly less than 10 over the past 22 years.
Your Honor, at this time we'd like
Quindi
to
non
offer
è un
Dr.
testimone
Gilbert as an expert
professionista,
in
è un
the field of
medico
orthopedic surgery,
professionista.
specializing in the hand.
All right, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So moved.
So, Dr. Gilbert, what work were you asked to do in connection with this case?
No, non c'è il verdetto, né oggi, non è questa settimana il verdetto.
Medical records, radiographs, pictures, as well as testimonies and depositions related to Mr. Depp's finger injury.
Domani le arringhe. No, un testimone portato da lui, esperto della mano.
To your understanding, what is Mr. Depp's explanation of how his finger was injured?
He describes that he was in Australia and his right hand was over the side of a bar when a vodka bottle was thrown at his hand, injuring his right middle finger. And he describes that the vodka bottle exploded.
Are you aware of other explanations for that injury?
There have been multiple other explanations, but I think the one that was brought out was by Ms. Hurd, who believed that Mr. Depp was holding a landline and out of anger was punching it against the wall, and this resulted in his right middle finger injury.
Based on your review of the medical records and other documents in connection with Mr. Depp's finger injury, how would you describe the nature of the injury to Mr. Depp's finger?
Ma che dici, Aga,
Well, the nature of
davvero?
the injury was he had what we describe as a comminuted fracture of the distal phalanx, meaning there was a fracture of the tip of the finger, and comminuted meaning that there were multiple pieces. So this is some type of blunt
Season
force
2.
with a high mechanism of injury. He also sustained loss of the tissue along what's called the ulnar side of the finger towards the little finger. And this appeared, based upon my review of the pictures, to be some type of sharp
Sento meglio la bilancia, non saprei dirti da che parte pende. Sicuramente lei mente. Lui non so se la giuria possa dare ragione al fatto che lui merita 50 milioni per diffamazione, ma direi che la bilancia pende dalla sua parte.
Go to page 3. And Dr. Gilbert, are you familiar with this document?
Yes.
And what is it?
So these are two radiographs, x-rays of Mr. Depp's fingers.
Radiografie, ok.
His middle finger.
Okay. Sorry, just to stop you, but Your Honor, may we publish this to the jury as a demonstrative?
Any objection?
Per sicurezza tolgo la schermata, ve la rimetto, tanto sono
All right,
radiografie.
we'll identify it as 60 page 3 and publish to the jury.
And Dr. Gilbert, sorry to cut you off
that's okay.
there. Can you just tell the jury what we're looking at here in this
We're looking
X-ray?
at two x-rays of Mr.
radiografie,
Depp's right
ok.
middle finger after the injury. And towards the tip of the finger, there's a fracture, again, what I described as a comminuted fracture, meaning there are multiple pieces at the tip. There's also a transverse component to the fracture closer to the joint.
In your view, what types of mechanisms can cause this sort of injury?
So this is a
Ma quanti anelli ha? Ma la riesce a chiudere la
has
mano?
high velocity or force, generally a crush type injury. A simple fall would not result in a a comminuted fracture such as is seen in these x-rays.
And we're using the term comminuted fracture. Can we just define that quickly for us?
So again, comminuted, and it's not
Sono
particular
proprio
to a
rozzi.
finger, is a medical term for a fracture that has multiple fragments.
In your opinion, could this injury have been sustained in the manner Mr. Depp described?
I do believe so.
And how might that work? How might a thrown vodka bottle produce an injury like that?
Con un paio
So
di...
vodka
Sì,
bottle
una bella
with a
auto
hard
nuova,
object,
Migli.
would have crushed the tip of the finger, resulting in the comminuted fracture. And in addition, as the vodka bottle broke, the glass would have lacerated the finger, resulting in the soft tissue loss. That
Secondo
was
me è
also
anche
seen
una
with the
somma di
surgery.
denaro difficile da valutare per delle persone normali,
What's
Ag,
your
ed è un'altra
assessment
cosa
of
che mi
the
lascia
description of
un
the
po'
cause
così.
of the injury offered by Ms. Heard?
I think that's highly unlikely.
And why is that?
Because in general, when an injury is caused by punching against a wall or a hard object, it is extremely rare to see an injury to the tips of the fingers, which is seen with Mr. Depp's injury. Generally, you're holding something with a fist, and that in general leads to injuries most commonly of the knuckles here.
Per me li spaccava la
or
pelle,
fractures of
Fidi.
the metacarpals, we call these boxer fractures. Second most common after those would be injuries to these, but as you can see, if you're holding something and hitting against something, it is very unlikely that the tips of the fingers will be injured. In addition, just taking into account the radiographs and the pictures of the injury, I would not believe that solely a blunt force against a wall would result in the soft tissue loss.
What other injuries, if any, would you expect to see on Mr. Depp's hand if the injury had occurred as Ms. Heard described?
So if that were the cause of the injury, you would certainly, that would be a dorsally directed, so this is the dorsal in the back of the hand, as opposed to the palmar side. So if you're punching against something, you would certainly expect an injury to the nail bed, and those
Davvero,
are always
Ag?
seen in those type of injuries. If there is an injury to the tip of the finger, which again I said is rare, so you would see either a loss of the nail or blood underneath the nail called a subungual hematoma.
In your review of the medical records, did you see any sign of anything like that?
None whatsoever.
In your view, is the injury? Can you explain to us exactly why you think the injury is consistent with Mr. Depp's description?
Well, again, his hand, he describes his hand being held over a marble bar, which is a firm, something firm, unyielding, and the bottle hit against the finger. So basically the finger
Pirati dei Caraibi era 22 milioni.
Described as a comminuted fracture, and as Mr. Depp described, the bottle exploded, so it's certainly reasonable that the glass that exploded as well led to the
Hanno
soft
un'ora e
tissue
un quarto e
loss
mi hai
along the
ricordato,
aspect
metti
of
che
the
oggi
finger.
volevo cronometrarli.
Now, did you observe the testimony of Dr. Richard Moore?
Yes, I did.
And he testified
Il contratto
about
firmato è
finger
stato
injury as well.
licenziato mid-contratto.
Did you agree with Dr. Moore's testimony?
Certain parts of his testimony I did, yes,
Okay.
but not all of it.
Focusing on the parts that well, first of all, why don't you tell us what you agree on?
Well, I agreed in terms of his interpretation of the x-rays, saying that he had a comminuted fracture and this was some type of high-force injury.
Okay. What did you disagree with?
Ho capito,
Well, I
Ag.
disagree
Grazie.
with several things that he said. He first said that he does not believe that the mechanism of injury could be, as described by Mr. Depp, holding the hand.
Davvero, Fox,
on
non
the
ero
side
così
of
rapido a
a
imparare le cose a scuola.
marble bar, because he said it was all a palmar injury, and there was a palmar component to the injury. I'm talking about the soft tissue loss, but there was also a dorsal, meaning the back of the finger. So the soft tissue loss was actually, if you looked at the pictures which were shown when Dr. Moore testified,
Penso che siano anche pochi,
the injury
nel
goes
senso
like
che
this. So it's an angled or an oblique type injury.
penso che sia
And
l'equivalente
there's
di
no
una
way that
persona
anybody
normale di chiedere
determined whether or
50.000
not it was
euro,
a
cioè
palmar
il
directed
guadagno
force,
di
meaning from the palm side or dorsally directed force.
3-4
But certainly
anni
either are plausible.
lordo, ovviamente.
Anything else come to mind that you disagreed with?
Ovviamente una persona della sua
Well, he
età.
also described that this was definite. Well, he thought that this was a pinching or what he described as an avulsion type injury, and that's referring to the soft tissue loss. That's certainly possible, but if you look at the pictures that were shown when he testified, the laceration looked fairly clean. There were clean edges. It was not jagged. And generally, when you have an avulsion or a pinch type injury, you see a very irregular border to the skin. It's pinched off, you can imagine, as opposed to something that's cleaner that would be lacerated by, let's just say, a piece of glass or a knife or whatever. And that's more consistent with the pictures of Mr. Depp's injury.
And we were using the term soft tissue loss, and just to make sure we're on the same page, can you just tell us very quickly what you're referring to there?
Right, so there were two components to this injury. One, the fracture of the bone, and two, he had loss of the soft tissues so that the bone was exposed. So that amputated part that was found at the bar.
Now, you were saying that Dr. Moore testified that this was an avulsion, and meaning a pinching injury, right?
Correct.
Why do you believe it's more likely that it was a laceration?
Well, again, in general, a pinch
Stanno
type injury
contraddicendo la
results
testimonianza
in
dell'esperto di Ember. L'esperto
one
di
much
Ember
more
diceva
damage to
che
the
era
remaining tissue, but the remaining tissue
una
is
ferita
usually
da
very
pizzico,
irregular.
cioè da
The borders are
pressione,
jagged,
compressione, mentre lui dice che è
and
un
that's not
taglio.
what was depicted in the pictures.
Dr. Moore also testified that he thought a vodka bottle might not have sufficient force to cause the injury here. Is that your understanding of his testimony?
Correct.
What's your response to that?
I certainly believe that a vodka bottle that was thrown from a distance against a hand that was resting on a marble bar is more than sufficient force to result in this fracture and soft tissue loss.
Now, in looking at the medical records and the pictures of Mr. Depp's hand, what was the condition of his nail?
There was no
Anche
injury to
se
the-
vuota, ragazzi, immaginate lanciare una bottiglia con forza, con impeto.
The fact that there was no injury to the nail.
Well, it makes it highly unlikely that the mechanism of injury described by Ms. Heard resulted in this injury, because you really would always see an injury to the nail and or nail bed.
Ma per assurdo,
Do you have any
immaginate,
opinion regarding
senza
the
andare a
direction of the
specializzarci
injury?
in bottiglie di vodka e robe del genere, pensate anche solo alla
It's
classica
certainly
bottiglia della
based upon
Peroni da
soft tissue
66.
loss. It's an
Immaginatevi
angled
pigliarvi una
injury
Peroni da
because of
66
because of soft tissue
sulla
loss
punta del dito
at an angle. He
qui,
lost some of the tissue on the
mentre
back
siete
of
così
the
e
finger,
fate questo
as well as the
gesto,
palm
immaginate
side.
prendervi una Peroni da
Primarily along the
66
palm
vuota
side,
qui.
but other than that, you can't make any assumptions. Unless you saw a videotape of this injury, nobody could tell you definitively what the direction of the injury was.
Dr. Moore also commented on the absence of fragments of broken glass in Mr. Depp's injury. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And how does the absence of glass fragments factor into your analysis?
Che si spacca una bottiglia, mica fa dei
really
pezzi così
doesn't.
piccoli.
I've seen hundreds, if not probably at least 500 or more glass injuries, and I would say probably the majority you don't see glass in these injuries. It is much more common to see glass embedded in the wounds when you're talking about very fine glass. So if, just say a wine glass would explode or something of that nature, where you get little tiny shards. But in general, when you have thick glass, such as you see in a bottle or a pane of glass, you generally don't see, because they break into bigger pieces, and you generally don't see the glass. But you certainly can, but it's not surprising that you don't.
Can you definitively
Capito,
state how
Mr.
this
Green.
injury occurred?
No, nobody can definitively state.
Ma un conto è prendere un cranio,
No further questions.
un conto è prendere la
Cross-examination.
punta di un dito,
Thank you, Your Honor.
senza contare che sarà stato magari anche una vodka particolare con le
Now,
bottiglie quelle
you're being paid
artigianali.
$1,000 an hour for your work on this case, correct?
Correct.
And you agree, just to sum up how Mr. Moniz finished, you agree that the finger injury could have been caused by any number of things, right?
Yes.
And you're not offering an expert opinion on what you believe caused the finger injury, correct?
Correct.
And you're aware, you said a few times Ms. Heard's account or Ms. Heard's explanation, right? You remember saying that?
Yes.
You're actually aware that Amber has said she doesn't know how he lost his finger. You're aware of that, right?
Yes.
Ma se ha detto che se la...
So when you were just talking about Ms. Heard's account or Ms. Heard's explanation, you're aware she's never actually given an explanation for how she thinks he lost his finger, correct?
No.
Yes. You're aware that Ms. Heard testified, and this was from your deposition, you're aware that she testified she doesn't know how he got his fingertip chopped off.
Tempo.
You're aware of that, right?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled.
No, I'm not. I reviewed the records, and in one of the testimonies depositions that I reviewed, it was described that that potentially it was lost when he was punching against the wall with a phone.
And
È
on
quello che
that,
abbiamo sentito anche noi.
The last point there, I think we agree. Ms. Heard's testified in this trial and previously that she saw him smash a phone to smithereens, a wall phone. You'd agree with that, correct?
Correct.
But she doesn't know if that was what caused him to lose his finger. You agree with that, correct?
I agree. I cannot speak for her, but yes.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Gilbert, you gave a deposition in this case on March 17th, correct?
Correct.
You were under oath in that deposition. You swore to tell the
Correct.
truth, correct?
Correct.
Okay, if you could turn to page 61, please. You see there are four pages per page of paper.
È stato chiamato da Johnny Depp, Templarium, è un medico chirurgo della mano. Non testimone
It's on page
esperto,
16 of the document.
medico chirurgo. Oltre 10.000 operazioni alle mani.
Okay, line 9, you're asked a question, and then Amber's response to that question, that's the line 9. Can you read that, please? Answer, I do not know. I did not see his finger go off. Question, and Dr. Gilbert, are you aware that Amber did not see Mr. Depp's
Non lo
finger
so,
go
Pat,
off?
perché domani c'è l'evasion, vediamo
Answer,
più
I
avanti.
mean, I'm aware that, well, I'm aware from reading, I am from reading this, I'm aware of the mechanism that she claimed would cause the finger injury. Question, but have you read anything so far that indicates she doesn't know how the finger injury happened? Answer, so far from what I'm reading here, yes. Did I read that right?
Yes.
And you've heard no testimony in this trial from Ms. Heard that the finger injury was definitively
A
caused by
squad
the phone,
canta.
that she doesn't know, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that the fingernail was uninjured, you said that, right?
Correct.
And the nail bed was uninjured,
Correct.
correct? But the area under the fingernail, in the pulp of the finger, that's where the injury took place, right?
It was not isolated to the pulp, no.
But it didn't injure the fingernail, that's my
Correct,
question. Okay.
yes.
And under Mr. Depp's alleged theory, Amber threw a vodka bottle at him from 10 feet away or so, right?
Correct.
And you testified you have no way to determine the angle that the bottle was coming from,
Correct.
right? But she threw it on a downward trajectory, correct? She didn't, there's no allegation, you've never read anything that she somehow underhanded it so it came up to his finger, right?
Correct.
And there's no way to tell, as you testified, what exact direction it came from, right?
Correct.
And the glass exploded, but you've already testified there was no glass in the wound, right?
Correct.
You haven't read any record of that in any medical records, correct?
Correct.
You also haven't read anything about there being cuts on the rest of his hand, right?
Correct.
And there was no glass found anywhere on the rest of his hand, correct?
Correct.
No bruising or injury on any other part of his hand other than the tip of his middle finger.
Correct.
And somehow, under Mr. Depp's theory, that bottle hit the bar and his fingers, but didn't damage the fingernail while it amputated the
Non vuol
area
dire
under the
niente.
nail. Correct?
Correct.
And your explanation of that is that you believe that his hand must have moved at some point during the force of the injury. Isn't that correct?
No, I said it could have, but I did not say that it did.
No, you believe that it did, don't you?
I said that it likely did, but I was not there, and I don't have videotape of the injury, so I can't determine that definitively.
Okay. Well, let's turn to page 25 of your deposition, please, on page 7.
Io odio quando fanno così, però.
Sorry,
Capisco che è
page
avvocatese, ma lo
25,
odio.
26, so it's page 7 of the
Quando
document.
cerchi di
Sorry if I was unclear on
contorcere
that.
le parole che una persona ha detto invece di presentare semplicemente dei fatti, lo detesto.
I'm there.
Okay. Line 18, question, and to be clear, by, quote, sitting in that position, you mean hand down, palmar side down. Answer, that's what he claimed. I mean, according to the history, yes. Question, and would it matter if Mr. Depp's hand was palmar side down? Answer, not really, because it really, and I discussed this, it really just depends upon the angle at which the injury occurred, and as well, you can't determine if his hand had moved
L'ho
at
vista
some
live,
point
certo,
during the
Cesare.
course of the injury, which I believe it probably did, which I didn't get into in my note here, but, question, and why do you believe that? Have you read anything in any of the materials to suggest that? Answer, no. Just that if it completely hit on the back of the finger, then he would have had a nail bed injury, which he did not. Did I read that right?
Correct.
That was testimony you gave under oath a
Ma
month
non
or
ha
two ago, right?
contratto nulla.
So even though you have never read anything that suggests Mr. Depp's hand moved, his hand moving is the only way that you can fit your testimony into what Mr. Depp wants you to testify to about how the injury occurred, isn't it?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay.
Boom.
That's what you testified to, that if his hand hadn't moved, that there would be a nail bed injury, correct?
That
No.
is incorrect. That's not what I testified.
In
That's not
fact,
what.
Dr. Gilbert, there's another explanation for how
Odioso.
Mr. Depp somehow suffered
Odioso.
an injury that didn't injure his nail one bit, but injured underneath the nail. And that explanation is that it didn't happen how Mr. Depp says it did, correct?
I cannot make that assumption, nor can you.
No further questions. Thank
All
you.
right, redirect.
Odioso, odioso davvero. Il bloccare la risposta di una persona quando dice no, non ho detto
The
quello,
absence
stavo
of
dicendo
other
zitto.
cuts
Odioso.
on Mr. Depp's hand. How do you factor that into your analysis?
You certainly can see an isolated finger injury with any type of injury, and I would say
Tempo.
any other
sono stati
host
veloci.
of mechanism of injuries.
Lascio andare
more
ancora un
likely
minuto
see
giusto per...
other- So again,
ma
if
sono
you're-
stati velocissimi.
I'm just using this as an example. If you're punching against a wall, you would more likely see multiple injuries to multiple fingers. It
7
really just
minuti
depends upon
circa.
how the bottle or how the mechanism of the injury impacted the hand at that point in time.
Ms. Heard's counsel made a point of emphasizing that there were no bruises or other injuries on the hand, right?
Correct.
And how does that fact affect your analysis, if at all?
Well, it doesn't discount anything, but it certainly makes other potential causes of injury more unlikely, meaning punching against a wall or getting the hand slammed in a door or something like that.
And your discussion of Ms. Heard's explanation of the alternative cause of the injury, was that based on anything other than Ms. Heard's statements?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Doctor, you can have a seat in the courtroom or you're free to go. Thank you. You can just leave it there, that's fine. Thank you, sir.
Tutto bene, Crystal?
Your next witness,
Plaintiff rests, Your Honor.
all right, plaintiff rests the rebuttal case, all right. Defendant counter plaintiff rebuttal case? Sure.
Quindi basta testimoni? Plaintiff rest, basta testimoni? Ora sale Amber? Sentenza entro l'11 giugno, ma domani fanno le arringhe finali. Hanno anche usato la mezz'ora extra, yes. Esatto, gli avvocati di lei tentano sempre di mettere delle parole in bocca e lo trovo veramente fastidioso. Poi mi rendo conto che sia il modus operandi degli avvocati, però è veramente, veramente antipatico vedere cioè, degli avvocati che dicono no, perché tu il 16 avevi detto che tecnicamente, cioè vanno a snocciolare quello che dice una persona per cercare di correggerlo, cioè di beccarlo ancora un po' sulla grammatica. Cioè, ad oggi tua opinione sulla vicenda? Ma la mia opinione è che Amber Heard palesemente ha creato un mare di bugie, un mare di situazioni per portare avanti la sua causa, che vale a dire lei voleva trarre vantaggio dalla situazione, voleva uscirsene con un divorzio megagalattico. Insomma, non ho dubbi sul fatto che lei sia bugiarda, non ho dubbi sul fatto che le cose che racconta non siano successe, o se sono successe lei le ha ingigantite in maniera inverosimile. Detto questo, per quanto mi riguarda, se io fossi nella giuria, darei ragione a Johnny Depp per la diffamazione e tutto quanto. Io darei ragione a Johnny Depp. Esatto, Armstrong, me ne rendo conto. Per vedere quanto tempo ci mette a smettere di piangere, vero Ana? La laurea in magistratura non la prende. No, ma infatti, ripeto, mi rendo conto che questo è essere avvocati, però hanno un'arma molto debole dalla loro, perché piegare le parole delle persone che parlano lascia un po' il tempo che trova. Un conto è quando gli butti un fatto davanti, un altro è cercare di piegare la narrativa a tuo favore. Sì, in ogni caso perlomeno anche lei ha la carriera distrutta, senza dubbio, ma a differenza di Johnny Depp, lei ha la carriera distrutta per le sue azioni. Questa è la cosa, è la differenza più grande. Sì, Johnny Depp ha raccontato del cacco, va bene, quello che vuoi, non penso che sia il cacco a rovinarle la carriera, rovina la carriera tutto quello che ha dimostrato di fare, perché sì, la giuria può scegliere quello che vuole, ma noi abbiamo visto. Noi abbiamo visto, cioè, del cacco, Molly. Noi sappiamo delle foto ritoccate, non ci va un esperto per vederlo, non ci va un esperto, è la stessa foto. Non ci va un esperto a credere a quello di TMZ, non ci va un esperto a credere che Johnny Depp si sia rotto il dito come dice di esserselo rotto, porca miseria. Non ci va un esperto a decidere che lei non ha veramente ricevuto le botte che dice di aver preso, altrimenti avrebbe un medical record e la faccia distrutta, per cui la sua reputazione è
Call
distrutta.
Mr. Julian Acker.
All right. Mr. Ackard?
Sentiamo chi è sto genio.
Yes, be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this case?
Ci sono le foto, Darkness. Veramente, Leico. Wiki Lawyer. Yeah, baby.
Good morning.
Morning.
Chi è questo genio?
Julian Eckert.
And can you please describe your educational background following high school?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from the University of Virginia.
Ah!
What is your profession?
I am a computer forensics investigator.
Where are you employed?
I work for a company called iDiscovery Solutions, or IDS.
And what is your title?
I'm a managing director at that company.
What services does IDS perform?
IDS provides
Tutte le
consulting,
compagnie con la
expert
AI
testimony
davanti
for
come Apple sono
analysis,
cringe,
data
change my
analysis,
mind.
electronic data review and production services, all to the business and legal community.
What, if any, of those services performed by IDS have you performed?
I perform all of those services.
How many years of experience do you have in computer forensics investigation?
I've worked in the industry for 20 years.
Can you please describe that experience to the jury?
I have experience
Tempo.
creating and implementing data preservation and collection strategies, doing data collections in a forensically sound manner, extracting data from collections, as well as analysis and metadata.
No, alla I
analysis of the
davanti.
evidence that I extract.
You mentioned collecting data from forensic collections. What material are you forensically imaging?
This would be any type of material that stores digital evidence, an iPhone, an iPad.
No, fallo
tablet,
parlare, Cesare, raccontami di più.
laptop, a cloud account, your Gmail account, anything that has digital evidence.
Have you published in your areas of expertise?
Yes, I've published on data preservation and collection and analysis strategies.
Have you ever given any trainings or presentations to other individuals in the e-discovery area?
Yes, I have. I do trainings and presentations to lawyers through continuous learning education.
What, if any, professional certifications do you have?
I have
Assolutamente,
a
Molly.
GIAC GCFE, that's the GIAC Certified Forensic Examiner certification.
And what were the requirements of obtaining that certification?
To obtain that certification, you need a minimum number of hours in the field, as well as you need to pass a test with a certain degree of, a certain percentage of passing.
Do you belong to any professional organizations?
I do. I'm a member of a conference called the Sedona Conference. It's a conference that is a group of legal professionals, judges, and technologists.
È la
who
stessa
discuss
cosa
the
della
intersection of
IEEE,
law,
vero?
technology and technology issues in the legal community.
È la stessa
Have you
cosa della
previously served as an
IEEE.
expert witness?
Yes, I have.
And when did you first serve as an expert witness?
I believe that would have been around 2009 was the first time I served.
Have you previously been
Veramente,
qualified as an
Devi,
expert
non ci avevo
witness in the
pensato.
field of computer forensics?
Yes, I have. I've been qualified probably a half
No, 7
dozen
ore
to a
per
dozen
tutto il team,
times
Vincenzo.
in both federal and state court, including this court right here.
And has a court ever declined to
Stavo
qualify
prendendo
you
in
as an
giro,
expert
Grigio.
witness?
No, they have not.
Your Honor, I offer Julian Acker as an expert in the field of computer forensics.
No objection, Your
All
Honor.
right, so moved. Could you just spell your last name
Spaccalo.
for me, Mr. Acker?
Ackert, Ackert.
Thank you so much, sir.
Spaccalo.
Mr. Acker, what is forensic imaging?
Forensic imaging is the process of capturing the data on a digital device in a forensically sound manner.
And how is a forensic
Esattamente,
copy
Ana.
created?
I suoi testimoni sono
Using
testimoni che lo fanno per
specialized software
lavoro.
that's available to forensic investigators,
Ember
they're
ha
able
ancora
to collect the data from
poco più di
devices,
un'ora.
and that software may vary depending on the device, like a phone or a laptop.
What type of information does a forensic image collect?
It's meant to really collect everything on the device. So, for example, on a laptop, it's going to collect your documents, your emails, your photographs, your documents like Excel spreadsheets, PDF files.
Per le cose
any
grosse sì,
applications
Mosce,
that
farà
you
sicuro
bring
la
in,
ringa finale.
the history of what you've opened or looked at on the laptop, as well as all of the metadata for these different types of electronically stored information files.
And does any other information accompany that information that's collected?
Typically with a forensic image, you're also going to get log files. Log files are files that help you validate the forensic image and verify that it was a forensically sound data collection.
And how do log files enable you to do that?
Log files list information within the files. Sometimes they're even embedded within the images themselves, but they provide verification information that allows you to authenticate the image and the data on the image.
What is the purpose of creating a forensic image of devices or data?
In order to extract and analyze data forensically for the
Quello che sta dicendo è inutile perché tanto lui è uno che lavora per un'azienda che fa questo, che fa le
What, if
cose
any,
per i
specific
tribunali,
types of
cioè
data are collected in that image and extraction?
It's going to be any type of data that comes from the image, whether you're extracting photographs or documents or spreadsheets or anything of that nature.
Do you recall Mr. Neumeister mentioning the term hashing yesterday?
I do.
What is that?
Hashing is essentially a digital fingerprint of a file. It's an evaluation of the binary ones and zeros, or how the file is stored on a hard drive, and it examines the ones and zeros in a manner that gives every file a digital fingerprint, essentially, and identifies the uniqueness of the file.
And what, if any, applicability does hashing have to the visual appearance of data?
Hashing has nothing to do with the visual appearance.
Non
For
penso
example,
di
if I
riuscire,
have a
Anto.
Word document that
Posso provare.
I printed and then saved, therefore I haven't visually changed the Word document, the metadata of that Word document indicating that I printed it would be different, and therefore that Word document would not hash to the version that I used before printing.
Can you give any examples of digital photographs that visually appear the same, not hashing?
I believe Mr. Neumeister included 3 of those in his demonstratives yesterday, 3 side-by-side photographs that looked visually the same but did not hash. It made sense that they wouldn't hash. Each of them had different file sizes. And a file size can change for a photograph depending on what you do with the photograph. So for example, maybe you want to take that photograph and email it to somebody, and on your phone, you choose to use a small, medium, or large, or different size of the photograph when you email. When you send that email with that photograph, you've changed the hash value because you've changed the ones and zeros.
Ma
because
ieri
you've changed the
Neumeister ha
size of the
spiegato che non combaciavano per dimensione, nel senso che non aveva un
What, if
senso
anything, do you recall
il
from Mr.
multiplo della
Neumeister's
dimensione,
testimony
no?
regarding photos 3?
Mr. Neumeister was concerned about a particular metadata field, EXIF metadata, which there's 2 types of metadata for files. There's the embedded metadata, which is what we're discussing here, the EXIF metadata, and external metadata. And Mr. Neumeister was concerned with embedded metadata within the file that indicated that
Questo è del
the
settore
software
delle
version
falsificazioni
that the
delle
file
prove,
actually was
praticamente.
Photos.
What is Photos 3.0?
Photos is actually the software application that's built into the Apple Macintosh operating system for laptops. This is the application that launches by default when you're on an Apple computer and use Photos.
What are the capabilities of Photos 3.0?
There's multiple capabilities for it. You can, for example, create an album with it and put multiple photos within an album. You can organize or sort your photos by date and time taken or place. You can also use that to edit photos.
You mentioned metadata earlier. What is that?
Metadata is information about a file. For example, with a document, it could be when was the document created or last saved, or who saved it, who was the author of the
L'ho
document.
fottuta.
For photographs, metadata includes information that you've seen on demonstratives before, including when was the image taken, what kind of phone took the image, what software was originally used for that image. Any type of information inside the photograph, the EXIF data that you've heard, is metadata.
La foto.
Did you form any opinions in response to Mr. Neumeister's testimony
Alla
regarding
pausa la
Photos
foto.
3.0 appearing in a software
Anzi,
EXIF
blocco
metadata
dopo
field?
questo.
Yes, I did.
And what are those?
My opinion is that for each of the photos that he identified, for all but one in his demonstrative, I actually found the equivalent original photo that did not have photos in the EXIF metadata. In other words, those are the photos that he was indicated he would have expected to see the iOS or the phone software version on those photos.
How do you know it is an original version of the photograph?
This is a little bit dependent on the Apple ecosystem. Amber uses Apple devices, and those devices, by definition of how Apple works, synchronize your information from device to device. So for example, if you take a photo on your phone, you see that same photo on your tablet or your iPad or your iCloud account or even your MacBook. And that's all because of user experience. Apple wants you to be able to see and visually have the same experience on all your devices. So the photo that was originally taken traverses or gets synchronized to other devices.
Voglio vedere se Mr. Gigachad ha raggiunto la mia stessa conclusione e lo fotte così. C'è una premessa proprio in tutto questo che non ha senso.
Listed in the software EXIF metadata field. What does that mean?
That means that the photo was not saved using the Photos application.
And what, if any, data sets did you use to come to that conclusion?
I used all of the data sets that I collected or were collected for Amber, including mobile devices, tablets, laptops, etc.
Michelle, can you please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 1671?
C'è una premessa alla base di tutto questo che non regge, spero che GigaChad l'abbia
Do you
beccata.
recognize this chart, Mr. Eckert?
No,
I do.
il fatto è
What is
che
it?
Amber ha portato come prova un backup di iTunes. Backup di iTunes è un backup del suo iPhone, quindi per far sì che ci siano delle foto di Foto 3 sul suo iPhone vuol dire che sono passate dal Mac e le ha rimesse sull'iPhone.
All right. It'll be published as a demonstrative.
Vuol dire che lei ha curato il backup, ha preso un iPhone, ha messo quello che serviva, ha fatto il backup e ha lanciato il telefono nella stratosfera per portare solamente il backup. Backup curato, quindi...
Thank you. This chart represents for each of the items in Neumeister's report, which his demonstrative was based on,
Precisamente,
the page
Giubbins.
number of the item on his report and
Guardate qua.
the items that I found on
JPG,
Ms. Heard's
JPG.
devices that did not indicate
JPG, tutte
the
le volte che
software
leggete JPG e
metadata
Microsoft,
field
tutte le volte che
showing
leggete
photos.
JPEG
Rather, they indicated
Mac.
that they were the original software metadata field of iOS.
Quindi
And
iPhone
do you see the
6,
second column
iPhone
titled
6,
Neumeister Report
JPG, JPG,
Yes, I do.
JPG,
Information in
JPG,
that column means?
sono tutte da
This is
Microsoft.
date time metadata of the particular photo on Neumeister's report. So for example, the first row, 23, the date time captured, or the date captured is December 16th, 2015. The second row, 24, you see that the date time is May 21st, 2016.
Vedete che c'è scritto
Third row,
iPhone 6,
May 21st,
ci fosse stato
2016.
scritto
Fourth
iPhone,
row,
computer,
May
mail,
21st,
hard disk, altre robe, ma c'è scritto
Can you scroll to the
iPhone,
next page,
c'è
please,
scritto
Michelle?
iPhone, JPG, JPG, JPG,
Please continue for the
boh,
items on
chiuso,
this
caso
page.
chiuso.
The top row of this page, the one that came from Neumeister's report, page 30, shows December 16th, 2016. And then finally, 32 shows March 23rd, 2013.
Do you see, can you scroll back to the top, please, Michelle? Do you see the, all the way to the top, I'm sorry, the right-hand column of this chart,
Yes, I do.
and where it says device ID and file name?
Yes.
Can you please explain what the information in that column means for each of the items identified from Mr. Neumeister's demonstrative?
So these are the evidence IDs, and evidence ID is the ID value I give to a particular piece of data that I collect, for example, a phone or a laptop, and the matching file name found on that evidence ID that indicated the original version of this same photograph that Neumeister identified that did not show photos in the software metadata and rather showed the iOS version in the metadata.
And what do the little A's followed by numbers, backup, what does that mean?
Those are evidence IDs. Anything with an A number is the evidence ID
Ma
of the
come,
actual
ma-
device collected. Anything that starts with a backup and follows by another number is an iTunes backup.
So what, if any, what items in this right-hand column, based on the coding you have here, are iTunes backups?
Only the ones that start with the word backup. Even the ones that start with an A number are actually an iTunes or an iOS backup in iCloud. So your phone can actually be backed up to iCloud, and those are coming from an iOS backup in iCloud. Everything else is coming from an actual physical device.
Can you just take this down for a second, Michelle, and pull up 1675, please? Defendant 1675.
Ma GigaChad è pronto.
Do you recognize this chart, Mr. Eckert?
Yes, I do.
Without yet getting into the contents, can you please describe generally what it is?
This is a chart that I prepared as a summary of my findings.
Permission to publish Defendant 1675 is a demonstrative, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, 1675 will be published as demonstrative.
Can you please describe in more detail what the three columns you can see in this chart represent?
Sure, this starts to give some detail about the particular evidence ID. So for example, A001 was an iPhone X of Amber's that was collected. A002 was an iPad of Amber's collected. A11, 12, and 13, slightly down, are three different laptops that were collected for Amber.
And do you see the IDS evidence number column?
Yes, I do.
Do you see the source type column
Yes, I do.
and the source details column?
Non
Yes,
vedo
Can you please describe what those columns mean?
neanche un dispositivo non
Generally,
Apple qua
IDS
dentro.
evidence number is the evidence number that we assign to a
Non
particular
vedo neanche
piece of
un
evidence,
dispositivo non
and the
Apple,
type
my
of
man.
details come from a description of that type of evidence based upon the collection set.
And Michelle, can you please do a side-by-side of
iPhone,
1675
iPad, iPhone,
and
iPad.
1671? Thank you. So, Mr. Actor, can you please describe the relationship between these two demonstrative exhibits?
Certainly. If you look at 1671, the one on the left, you can see in the fourth column the different evidence IDs where I identified the original versions of those same pictures that Mr. Neumeister had specifically identified and the sources of where they were identified. So if you look at the first one, for example, the picture Neumeister referenced on page 24, or I guess that's the second one, there are equivalent versions or original versions of those that do not show the software EXIF metadata field of photos. Rather, it shows the original iOS version on A001, which was Amber Heard's iPhone X, A002, which is Amber Heard's iPad Pro. Scrolling on down through there, you see it on A0011, which is Amber Heard's laptop, same with A0012 and 13. You can see this again with the next row that's visible at the very top. Neumeister identified a photograph on page 30 taken on December 16th, 2015, and he was concerned about the EXIF metadata of that, showing the software version of
Ma cosa
photos.
stai ancora parlando?
The original
Cioè, scherzavo,
versions of
parla,
those were
parla.
found again on A001, that's her iPhone X, A002, her iPad, and it's not surprising to me that I found all these on all the devices because that's how the Apple ecosystem works. It replicates your pictures or synchronizes your pictures across your devices when you take them.
Mr. Acker, you can take this down, Michelle. Do you recall Mr. Neumeister's testimony regarding what he claims of EXIF metadata modification?
Yes, I do. This is a completely hypothetical scenario. Mr. Neumeister never specified any pictures with specificity that had EXIF metadata modification, and it's a hypothetical in my opinion.
Mr. Acker, did you form any overall conclusions in this
Prop,
case?
sì, ma il discorso... no, perché volontariamente diffamato no, se le foto sono vere lei ha detto la verità, non lo ha diffamato. Il discorso è che le foto sono sia false per quello che ritraggono, sia false per la foto in sé. Due layer di falsità.
For which I found Mr. Neumeister's original photos that he had concerns about, specifically the ones that had iOS in the software metadata field. I validated that those came from devices that had log files that were validated by me. In other words, they came from original evidence files, and in most instances, they came from more than one file.
Mr. Acker, the opinions you have testified to today made to a reasonable degree of forensic certainty.
Yes, they are.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Cross-examination, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You've worked with opposing counsel's law firm approximately 20 times before?
Give or take, yes.
Ha lavorato già 20 volte per i suoi avvocati.
Those 20 probably would have been spread out over more than a dozen years.
Okay. As you sit here today, you cannot testify that all of the photographs produced by Ms. Heard are authentic originals, correct?
Now, I can testify to the ones that Mr. Neumeister identified with specificity.
Right, but there were thousands of photographs provided that Mr. Neumeister didn't testify about, right?
I have no opinions on any photographs that the opposing expert has no opinions on.
Comodo.
All right. My question to you, though, is as you sit here today, can you testify that all the photographs produced by Ms. Heard are authentic originals?
No.
As I sit here today, I cannot opine to photographs that have not been presented to me that are not authentic originals.
All right. You'll agree with me that in some instances, Miss Heard produced multiple versions of
bloccato
the
il
same
tempo.
photograph, right?
Yes,
Yeah, you just talked about it, right?
yes,
Right. And you'll agree with me that the XF data of some of the photos produced by Ms. Heard reflect the use of a photo editing application.
Deglutizione violenta.
no.
No?
I'll agree that they show the use of the Photos application, which is a sorting and editing application.
Okay, so what you were quibbling with is that it will both sort and edit.
That is correct.
Okay. Are you prepared to swear under oath that each and every photograph provided by Ms. Heard and entered into evidence in this court is an authentic original?
Based on the metadata that I have reviewed of the specific photographs I have reviewed, I can confirm that those are authentic original photographs. For the ones that Mr. Neumeister identified, I identified photos that were authentic originals.
No, I'm asking you a broader question than that. There were multiple photographs that Ms. Heard provided that were entered into evidence in this court. Are you testifying that those are each authentic originals?
I have no testimony or opinion on
Non
those
lo
because
so,
nobody's
non l'ho
provided me
visto.
opinion that they're not.
Okay. Mr. Gibson, will you pull up Defendant's Exhibit 712,
713.
Defendant's 713 next to one another? Your Honor, these have already been...
712,
and I-
713.
to the jury.
Okay, they're admitted, we can publish.
Ricordiamo,
Can you see those circles?
Yes, I can.
cosa mi dice adesso? Le ha
Will you agree with
organizzate?
me that those are different pictures?
Visually, they look different to me, yes.
All right, we can take that down.
Ha detto che sono diverse? Visually.
Gibson, can you pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 1308?
Ha detto visually
Not been admitted, Your
different.
Honor, and I propose to use it as a demonstrative.
Any objection?
Not as a demonstrative, Your Honor.
All right. Be identified and published to the jury as a demonstrative.
E lei, vero?
Any objection to entering it into evidence?
Oh, in chiaro!
Your Honor. Actually, no. No objection, Your
No
Honor.
objection, all right, it's in
Ma tutti i
evidence.
dati in chiaro!
1308 is in evidence. Mr. Gibson, can you blow up the time, date, and file name?
Los Angeles, California. 9-25-12, 9-25-12.
Sir, you just agreed with me that those two photos are different photos, correct?
I agreed that they were visually different, yes.
Right. So they are two visually different photos that were created at the exact same
Second.
hour, the exact same minute, the exact same second as each other, correct?
And that's what the daytime metadata shows, yes.
And the metadata shows something else too. They have the exact same file name, don't they, sir?
Yes, but that's not embedded metadata.
Right. How would you have this jury decide which one is real?
I think you would need to look at the software metadata field, which I haven't looked at. I don't recall if I looked at for this particular field, but I think that's what even Mr. Neumeister said, that you need to look at the software metadata field.
But we have two photographs entered into evidence in this court that have the same identifying information, but in your view, look visually different, correct?
I don't agree that they have the same identifying information. I don't see a software metadata field here.
The identifying information includes the hour, minute, and second they were taken, this picture were taken.
I see that.
No further questions.
All right, and just for the record, since we already have 712 and 713 in evidence as redacted, now this will be 712 and 713A. So 712A and 71213A are now in evidence, just to keep the record clean, okay?
E adesso? E mo che cazzo
All right.
dici?
Redirect.
Mr. Acker, you just mentioned embedded metadata. What is that?
Embedded metadata is metadata.
Ma ancora parli? Ma vai a casa,
We talked
coglione!
earlier about the date printed of a Word document. That's embedded into the file, and that traverses with the file wherever it goes.
And based on all of the photo metadata you have reviewed, do you have any reason to question the forensic authenticity of any photos Mr. Neumeister testified to for which you were responding to?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, based on all of the photo metadata you have reviewed, based on the photos Mr. Neumeister testified to, do you have any reason to question the forensic authenticity of those photos?
I do not.
Following your cross-examination, Mr. Acker, have any of your opinions in this matter
No.
changed?
They have not.
And is it still your testimony that the opinions you testified to do today are made with a reasonable degree of forensic certainty?
Yes.
No further questions, Your
All
Honor.
right, thank you. Sir, you can have a seat in the courtroom, or you're free to go. All right. Did you want to approach just for a moment?
Hanno 42 minuti rimasti. Hanno ancora 42 minuti, sono senza parole per quello che appena vi... Ma la faccia di marmo che hanno i testimoni di lei, la faccia di marmo è impressionante. La faccia di marmo. A Depp mancano tipo 7 ore, può parlare tutto il giorno. E io la dico di marmo, Vuzkos. Ma certo che sono stati avvisati, ma alla fine gli ha detto, dopo la controesamina sono cambiate le tue opinioni. Ma minchia, ma come puoi non dire che non sono la stessa foto, hanno lo stesso nome, lo stesso ora, minuto, secondo, location? Di cosa parliamo ancora? Comunque erano pronti a controbattere al tipo di metadati di ieri. Sì, ma hanno risposto a un Lapua con una Makarov. Questo non rischia niente, non ha mentito. Ha solo detto cazzate, non ha mentito.
All right, your next witness.
Your Honor, we would like to call Dr. Don Hughes to the
All
stand
right,
again.
Dr. Hughes.
Esiste. Torna alla cazzara. Tempo.
Thank you, Doctor. Just a reminder that you're still under oath, okay, ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
And could you please just remind the jury who you are again?
Sure, I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist. I am board certified in forensic psychology. I am the president-elect of the trauma division of the American Psychological Association. And I evaluated Amber Heard over 6 visits for approximately
No,
29
questa è la
hours.
controparte di Curry.
Why are you here today?
To offer rebuttal testimony to Shannon Curry's testimony of yesterday.
Okay. Now, Dr. Curry said you used improper methods. Would you agree with that?
No, I would not.
Why? Please explain.
As I testified to you all several weeks ago, I used a standard forensic procedure that is well
Ma
established.
certo, Rico,
in our
ma è
field.
palese.
This is a multi-method, multi-hypothesis driven
Questa è la portata in- questa è la psicologa di parte di Amber.
Details and tests and external data to arrive at an opinion, and you're looking at the consistency across that data. There are 3 sort of sets of tests that we use as forensic psychologists, and I think that's where it seems that Dr. Curry seems confused. We
Si
have
vede perché guarda
forensic
verso la giuria,
assessment
esatto.
instruments. Those are instruments that are very neatly tied to a legal criteria. Those are most notably
Questa è quella che
done in a
leggeva,
criminal
esatto.
court. For competency, if someone has competency to stand trial, we have very clear measures that can track that legal criteria. The next level are forensically relevant instruments. And those instruments are not linked to a specific legal criteria, but they do have information that's germane to that finding. And that can be an example of a risk assessment measure and a malingering measure. So the malingering measure
A
that
un'ora
I
hanno finito.
utilized was the MFAST, and that was the only malingering measure in this case. The third category are clinical assessment instruments, and those are instruments that are validated and well-researched and used in the clinical realm as we understand
Esatto, proprio.
people's symptomatology and diagnostic and functional capacities. Those are things like the MMPI, the PAI, the CAPS, the TSI, because they are clinically relevant and they still give us very valuable information to individuals who are involved in a court case. And the reason that we do that and we use these clinical measures is because the majority of the people that we see are in a clinical realm. They're not in a courtroom. So they're well-validated and well-researched methods. What we also do is use a very different types of tests within that category. We use some checklists, some face-valid checklists. We use some tests that are those broadband personality inventories. We use structured clinical interviews, and then we look for the consistency across those data points. And when we use different types of tests, it gives us information about the individual, how they go about these tests in these different modalities.
Now, Dr. Curry seemed to suggest that Amber Heard tested the most extreme category in all of these different tests. Is that accurate?
Objection compound.
Overruled.
Vi ricordo che ieri la dottoressa Curry ha detto che, stando a quello che ha detto Amber durante le sue esamine, lei è più traumatizzata del 98% dei traumatizzati.
Describing her symptoms that I determined was accurate and reliable.
Now, Dr. Curry also suggested
Jordi, hai
that,
visto l'episodio di Inox
Amber
dove l'ho
Heard
fatta?
was, tested very, very high, 98 percentile, I think, on malingering and feigning. Could you speak to that, please?
Sure. So, I mean, she said a lot of things, so let's go through those tests. The first was the PAI, and that's that other broadband psychological
Objection
measure.
Da Johnny.
non-responsive.
I think it's very responsive.
Sustained.
Okay. Could you tell the jury about the PAI test that Dr. Curry addressed?
Yes, thank you. So that's the broadband measure that has validity scales built into it that gives us indications about how the individual goes about the test. I told you last time that there was no evidence of malingering or exaggeration or feigning on that test. What Dr. Curry was talking about was this tendency to put your best foot forward, to minimize faults on this PAI. That scale was right at the cusp.
Dottoressa Curry è quella che ha parlato ieri con gli occhiali, bionda.
You know, is this enough for an elevation for me to consider that as a serious response distortion, of which Dr. Curry was saying, and it was not. What was relevant on this test was there were elevations on anxiety, on affective anxiety, meaning anxiety, tension, worry,
Texana, yes,
on traumatic stress, on hyperactivity, and on affective instability. Those were the 4 scales that were elevated on this test. The borderline scale was not elevated on this test. And this test...
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
Yes.
Approccia, fagli usare il tempo. Chat, non sto più stampando, mi sento male che non sto stampando. Si vede da cosa? Faccio fatica a metterlo al countdown, Jubins. Stampa una barchetta. Potrei. Passa il tempo, certo.
So Dr. Curry, let's move to the TSI-2. Dr. Curry testified about your findings on that. Did you agree with her testimony yesterday?
No, again.
Please describe why. Explain why.
What Dr. Curry went back to, which is this 98th percentile, which I told you in the manual.
Come il revolver che è in tasca.
The manual. It says specifically that we do not use the percentile
Esatto,
range
Panti.
for this test. That indicates to me that, Dr. Curry does not know.
Giovanni profondo ingiustamente processato. Ingiustamente accusato.
To interpret it. That score, the one that's elevated, which she's talking about, that percentile rank, has a raw score. Amber's raw score is a 10. The cutoff score is a 15. She's nowhere near that level of exaggerated symptoms where I can't further look at that test. Secondly, there are 3 scales out of maybe there's about 20, a little more on the TSI that were elevated. Intrusive experiences, that's when thoughts and memories of the trauma come into your mind when you don't want them. Defensive avoidance, sort of behavioral ways that we try to push out those memories and not think about them. And then relational avoidance, a way of having difficulty in interpersonal relationships. Those are all trauma-based symptoms, and those were elevated on this test.
Thank you. Dr. Hughes, the MFAS, Dr. Curry addressed that as well and had criticisms for your interpretations. Do you agree with that?
No.
Please explain to the
So
jury.
the MFAST, as I told you last time, is a measure of malingering. It's the only measure of malingering that was done in this case. Dr. Curry did not independently administer measure malingering, and there are other ones that she could have done to augment her evaluation. And she kept saying something that MFAST is not for malingered PTSD. That's wrong on a couple levels. People who are going to malinger and feign don't only
Kiruton, non è ottima la mia stampante per fare le miniature. Se vuoi fare miniature ti serve una stampante a resina. La mia non fa delle belle miniature, purtroppo.
So when you're doing an evaluation, you're giving a malingering measure to get a sense of how this person is responding to this evaluation. Now, what you do is you take those 3 tests that I talked to you about, the PAI, the TSI, and the MFAST, all with valid scales, you have greater confidence in your results. And that is in the literature, and that's literature that Dr. Curry cited in her report. That bolsters the methodology that I used. That in the study that had the PAI, the MFAST, and the TSI in the title of detecting feigned from bona fide PTSD.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Curry also talked about the danger assessment scale and suggested that you had inappropriately interpreted that. Do you agree?
That's also incorrect.
Please describe for the jury.
Which I told you last time, the danger assessment scale has statistically validated risk factors for serious or lethal domestic violence. Those risk factors exist whether we go forward, we're sitting with someone in an acute setting and assessing them right now,
Non c'è un riferimento colore,
we look retrospectively about what factors may have been
Lo cambio all'evenienza.
that indicated severity. That instrument is used in what we call, there's called domestic fatality review boards. Those are boards after somebody has been
L'ho visto anch'io,
killed,
Bad Muffin, fanno la leva di un freno della moto, l'ho visto
situation.
anch'io.
They look at these risk factors to see what was there and what could be done.
All right. Dr. Curry also criticized your
Visto anch'io.
administering of the CAPS-5. Do you agree with her criticisms?
I do not.
Will you please explain to the jury?
So the CAPS-5, as you all have heard multiple times, is a structured clinical interview in determining PTSD according to DSM-5 criteria. On this
Non me lo fa
measure,
aprire.
Amber Heard scored in a moderate range. She did not over-exaggerate on this test. She could have said no, mild, moderate, severe, and extreme. All of hers were either 2s or 1s or 0s. None above that. So she's scoring in the moderate range, which still has functional impairments. I mean, we don't want someone to be having moderate PTSD, but that's not an exaggerated profile or exaggerated response style of someone who's answering an instrument.
Quello sembra un gruppo terroristico, ma che balle, dai.
PCL-5. Do you agree with her criticisms of your administration and interpretation of that?
No, so the PCL-5 is a checklist of symptoms of PTSD. It is, as she said, it is a face valid instrument.
Oggi mi è arrivata anche un'altra roba,
how you can endorse this. But what the person has to do is say, how disturbed am I by these symptoms? And when you have face valid measures with these other measures that have the built-in sort of ability scales, you're sort of controlling for that response bias error. You're controlling for that individual to sort of over-exaggerate. But then what you do with that test, because this is, we're not just administering them like robots, is you go and you do a clinical assessment.
Non sono bretelle, la
That's what
cinghia
I
per
did. I
il
took
fucile.
what she endorsed on that test in January of 2021,
Che tonti.
and I did a clinical assessment of those symptoms to see if they meet criteria for PTSD. That is something we do clinically, and I do in my office all the time. And yes, she did meet PTSD from that in January 2021.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Curry said you misinterpreted her test results. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree that I agree that I interpreted them, that she misinterpreted them.
Okay.
What?
And please explain
Yeah,
that.
so I said that before. My stance on the MMPI and how she interpreted it is, I believe, wrong, and I think most.
Objection, Your Honor.
May I approach?
That's the issue we just addressed.
I don't.
If you want to approach.
«30 minuti, chat». 30 minuti. Mi chiedo se sia l'ultimo testimone, perché non hanno tempo di farne un altro. Lei è l'ultimo, per forza. Non c'è tempo di fare altrimenti.
Now, Dr. Hughes, Dr. Curry also testified that a victim of PTSD has to effectively be prone and unable to function at all. Would you agree with that?
Objection misstates the evidence.
She said they couldn't hike, they
Ooh.
couldn't move, they couldn't function in any way, shape, or
overrule the
form.
objection.
Thank you.
No, that is not correct. That is often actually a myth and misconception about individuals who were struggling
Non
with
possono
PTSD or
portarla come
trauma-based
testimone
disorders, and
l'accusa.
I'm often called
Matti.
to answer that and speak to that. People who are struggling with trauma and PTSD are very strong, courageous, resilient people, even though that they're struggling. They get up, they have to go to work and drop their kid off at school and go to the market, even though they're struggling with these symptoms. So I often talk about it as they're sort of walking around with a 50-pound bag of flour on their backs, just sort of trying to get through the day, where sometimes that button's going to press play and the trauma's going to start activating in their head, and then they're going to be having to think about it and have startle and have physiological reactions until they can find a way to hit that pause and shut it off again. So they still have, impairments in other ways, but they go about their lives. They're not, totally debilitated. If you have someone in that high range, the highest score is an 80 on the CAPS, Ms. Hurd had a 28. If you have someone in the higher range, we have seen people who are, severely disabled because of it, but that's not the norm of people who have this moderate PTSD.
And did you find functional impairment with Amber?
Yes, I did.
Dove?
Now, Dr. Curry also said that it is not within the scope of a psychologist to evaluate domestic violence. Do you agree with that?
Of course, I don't agree with that. This is what I do for a living, day in, day out, for 25 years. We are specifically trained to understand the profound impact that trauma has on people's lives. That's what we do in the trauma division of the American Psychological Association. We disseminate that knowledge. And domestic violence is one of those profound traumas. Domestic violence is part of state licensing boards, that you can't get licensed in some states unless you take training on domestic violence. You can't renew your license unless you get training on domestic violence. So people who have, specialized training in this area, it is, beholden upon them to accurately assess for intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And it's more important to assess for the sort of scientific understanding of what domestic violence is. So you have to assess for the physical violence, the psychological violence, the surveillance.
Che TV, grazie dell'enorme ride. Benvenuti a tutti.
That is not gratuitous. That is
Objection.
Grazie mille dell'enorme ride, gentilissimo.
All right. Next question.
Okay. Now, Dr. Curry suggested that you made a determination just based on personal opinion and just on checklists and a couple of tests that you misinterpreted. Would you agree with that?
I vehemently disagree with that. As I stated to you, over 29
Mi è morto il
hours
bot.
and 12 psychological tests and reviewing a slew of documents in this case, most importantly, therapy records and interviews, collateral interviews with therapists, using all that data. That is
Per chi
what
fosse
a
nuovo,
solid
di
forensic
solito io non faccio queste cose, di
ethnographical
solito
exam
io
looks
sparo nei
like. And
giochi
then I made my
FPS.
conclusions based on my
Sto guardando il
clinical
processo di
education,
Johnny Depp e
knowledge, and
Amber
training
Heard,
to come up with a professional expert
sto prendendo
opinion.
appunti da giorni.
And just to remind, to make sure we're reminded here, you were qualified in this court, in this case, as an expert in forensic psychology, specifically in domestic violence and in no, I just lost it. And in violence, correct? Intimate, and in trauma, correct?
But I believe
Objection,
it-
Your Honor, misstates the record.
If you want to ask the question again.
Yeah, I probably should do that. You
25
were
minuti.
qualified- I gotta find my note. You were qualified as an expert in forensic psychology with a specialty in domestic violence and in trauma, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that was in this case.
That's correct.
25 minuti a
Now,
lei.
do you still hold the same opinions you did that you gave the jury earlier?
Yes, I do.
No
And
further
do you still
questions.
hold them within a reasonable degree of psychological probability and certainty?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor, but can we approach quickly?
Sure.
Hanno 24 minuti, una roba del genere. Se è l'ultimo testimone hanno finito. Sto facendo l'avvocato occasionale. No, a parte tutto, ne approfitto di questo momento di pausa per spiegare a chi non mi ha mai visto prima. Sto analizzando questo processo perché lo trovo una cosa molto importante per la società in generale, nel senso che è la prima volta che un uomo ha la possibilità di dimostrare che non sono vere per forza le accuse, cioè va contro il pregiudizio del fatto che una donna ha detto oh mio Dio è successo qualcosa e per ufficio d'ufficio non è neanche chiesta l'opinione dell'uomo. Johnny Depp è stato cancellato dalla società da 6 anni senza aver avuto nemmeno la possibilità di dire la sua, e una volta che dice la sua le cose non sono proprio andate come si pensava. Una maggiore cura sarebbe da usare in generale in tutte le questioni. Non sto dicendo che gli uomini hanno sempre ragione, non è quello che voglio dire, voglio semplicemente dire che quando ci sono delle accuse gravi, pubbliche o non pubbliche, in generale, quando si accusa di qualcosa, bisogna guardare entrambe le parti prima di giudicare.
The last time you were here, I believed that you testified that you had diagnosed Ms. Heard with PTSD before you gave the gold standard.
No, non è vero,
That's
Patri,
fine.
non è così.
That's correct.
Right. And that diagnosis is actually reflected in the first of the disclosures you put forward in this case.
I believe the first disclosure was February 2021, and at that point I had done 11 psychological tests. That's correct.
Right. And your disclosure reads, Ms. Heard's responses on the
Questo è eclatante.
PCL-5 support a DSM-5 diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder with an etiology of intimate partner violence she experienced by a former partner. Remember writing that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Perché sono famosi, di conseguenza le accuse valgono molto di più, King.
That you need to read the manual, right?
Yes.
Se io fossi accusato di stupro,
Can we put up 1311 as a
la maggior parte delle persone che conoscerò in futuro non lo sapranno nemmeno. Io potrei essere stato in carcere 5 anni fa e voi non potreste non saperlo.
Any objection to
I don't know
1311?
what it is, Your Honor.
All right, you want to
May we
leave?
approach?
You want to approach?
Ah, tu dici come lunghezza della giornata, Patri, ma è eccezionale questa cosa qua, l'ha detto anche il giudice più e più volte. L'ha detto anche il giudice. Pensavo in generale ti riferissi al fatto che il processo sta durando 2 mesi live, mentre invece è partito 2 anni fa, ma ci sono processi in Italia che vanno avanti da decenni. Beh sì, non avresti... onesto, Crazy, onesto. Ho capito, Patri, ma infatti il giudice l'ha detto più e più volte, eh.
Thank you.
Vediamo un po'.
I don't see this in my document either.
They're getting the right one up.
Yeah, we got it. Let's use 1312.
1312, okay. And that.
Tipo il processo Berlusconi-Rubi, tipo il processo Berlusconi-Rubi, esatto. Da quant'è che va avanti? 10 anni?
1312 can be published.
12?
Dr. Hughes, do you recognize what the National Center for PTSD is?
What it
Ah,
is?
proprio
Yes, I
così?
do.
And they publish
Proprio così?
the PTSD checklist for DSM.
Glielo sbattono in faccia così?
That what we've been calling the PCL-5.
Correct.
All right. And do you, are you familiar with the document that's on your screen?
Yes.
All right. What is it?
It's the instruction manual to how to administer
All right.
PCL5.
Okay. I'd like to move for the admission of 1312.
Any objection to 1312 coming into evidence?
Vanno di... Esatto. Ha detto proprio...
Can we go to the second page?
Alright. Possiamo andare alla pagina 2?
Can we blow up the second paragraph on the right? That's the PCL-5 should not be used as a standalone diagnostic tool. When considering a diagnosis, the clinician will still need to use clinical interviewing skills and a recommended structured interview,
Ciao.
e.g.,
È stato
the
bello.
CAPS-5 to determine a diagnosis, correct?
Ciao.
That's what the manual says.
Right,
Ciao.
and this manual
Okay.
also says
Ciao.
that this is a screening instrument, so when you do the clinical interviewing, you absolutely can determine diagnosis
So the
after
answer is
somebody
yes. The manual says you
still
the
need to use
PCL-5
clinical interviewing skills, which I used.
Well, let me finish my question. The PCL-5 should not be used as a standalone diagnostic tool, and they recommend using the CAPS-5 to determine a diagnosis, correct?
It does say that, yes.
Yeah, and you made your diagnosis before you did the CAPS-5.
I made my diagnosis doing clinical interviewing and 11 other psychological tests that supported diagnosis of PTSD and symptomatology consistent with PTSD.
Okay. You said that we should read the manual. Would you also agree with me that we need to read the directions on these tests?
Sure.
Okay.
Lui le sta facendo vedere questo perché lei gli ha detto di leggere il manuale?
1309 as a demonstrative.
Man! Damn! Lui gli sta facendo questo perché lei gli ha detto forse è meglio se legge il manuale? Damn, son!
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Uff!
Any objection of 1309?
Uff, con 4... così. Uff, con 4... Ma no! Che botta e risposta! Che botta e risposta! Mamma mia, si legga il manuale! Ok. Boom! Manuale! E il famoso studiate prima di parlare invecchiato male.
Doctor, do you recognize the demonstrative
Client
that's in
ID.
front of you?
Yes, but I didn't put the red lines on that.
No, I did.
Yes.
No, le ho messe io. Le ho messe io.
So, this, what do you recognize this as?
I recognize that we previously discussed this, and I told you that I oriented Ms. Hurd to a different time frame because she was already out of the relationship.
Okay, maybe we should back it up a little. This is the CTS-2 that you administered as part of this battery of tests that you indicate you did in relationship to your diagnosis.
Right, this is the conflict tactic scale too.
All right. And you'll agree with me that this test specifically asks, in front of every single question, how often did this happen in the past year?
Correct, and I
Right.
oriented the
Nell'anno passato, non 10 anni fa.
last year to get an accurate assessment of the
Lei ha fatto una diagnosi con un modulo che viene usato solo per analizzare le cose successe nell'anno prima. Ma questo è il 2019, loro hanno divorziato nel 2016. In the past
And
year.
you know that at the time that you gave this test to Ms. Heard, she had been away from Mr. Depp for far longer than a year, correct?
Which is why I oriented her to a different
Yes or no,
time
ma'am?
frame in answering the questions.
Doctor, yes or no?
So, of course,
Okay, you knew she was gone for more than a year.
of course.
All right, let's look at another one of these.
Che ciaddata galattica che gli sta facendo. Che ciaddata pazzesca.
You talked about the dangerous.
Che botte fa questo avvocato, mamma mia. Che botte da Orbi. Chad. No, il tempo è dell'altro. Che botte fenomenali. Mi hai detto di leggere il manuale? E tu le hai lette le istruzioni dei test che hai fatto tu? Boom!
Thank you.
Any objection to 1310 as a demonstrative? Okay.
La Heard ride tutte le volte che la smentiscono, la mettono in un angolo e lo fa con un fare come per dire non capisci un cazzo, cioè è denigratorio.
Dr. Hughes, this is a blank form, but this is the dangerous assessment test that you also gave to Ms. Heard, correct?
I didn't give it to her. I filled it out based on the data that was provided to me.
Oh, so you asked her the questions and then you filled it in.
It was somewhat collaborative.
Okay. Can we blow up the second full paragraph? It says, using the calendar, please mark the approximate dates during the past year when you were abused by your partner or ex-partner. You didn't use any calendar, did you?
No.
I did not use a calendar because she was already out of the relationship. As I said, these are static risk factors, so they don't change. So I
But these
orient her to the
exams-
time of the relationship.
Ma'am, it's fair to say that this examination that you gave specifically indicates that you were supposed to look over the past year. And you...
That's
C'è scritto.
that's one administration.
No,
People use
c'è
this
scritto qua.
instrument for if you're in an acute situation in a relationship.
Non importa come lo
trying to
usano,
get a
c'è
better
scritto nell'anno
assessment of the
passato.
current
Non
behavior.
importa qual è
You can
l'usanza.
use it
Questo è un documento
retrospectively, like I
ufficiale.
just stated, and in homicides and looking back about what are the serious risk factors that were in this relationship.
I didn't ask you about anything other than, don't the instructions limit this test to the previous year?
You can give this test not only on the previous
Nope, asking
year,
you about the instructions.
but I'm telling you how the test is administered in clinical practice and
No.
forensic practice.
And
Non siamo in
opposing
clinica.
counsel can come up and ask questions about it. I'm asking you about the instructions. And the instructions say, look over the past year.
Yeah, on this, yes, that it says that.
And you had actual knowledge when you gave the test that Mr. Depp was gone way more than a year before this test.
That is correct.
Right. All right. Let's look at more instructions. Can we look at 1247, which is already in evidence?
Il fatto che lei sia a capo dell'associazione di psicologi e che lei non sappia le dire... sì, assolutamente.
Dr. Hughes, you recognize this one too, right?
Yes.
All right. This is what everybody calls the CAPS 5.
Non hanno senso queste prove. Perché non puoi diagnosticare l'effetto che ha il trauma di un evento chiedendogli cose... È fatto perché il tempo che passa da un trauma cambia.
Standard administration and scoring of the CAPS 5 are essential for producing reliable and valid scores and diagnostic.
La cosa migliore? Dall'altra parte non hanno tempo di costruire una narrativa
You
diversa.
have to do this in a standardized way because it is the first instruction, correct?
Correct.
Can we go to the next page? One more. Oh, wait. That's good. this is a page on scoring, and we talked about this last time.
Yes.
You score these tests by frequency and intensity.
Correct.
Frequenza e intensità.
And you'll remember that in every single instance that you were asked to fill in the blank about frequency.
Loro gliel'avevano già contestato, loro avevano già contestato che mancavano dei
Oh.
dettagli nell'analisi.
You filled in any blank on this form with respect to frequency?
I filled in the frequency on the side of the caps where I am actually scoring the caps.
No, I asked
Where
you
it's
whether
relevant.
you filled in a single blank on this form with respect to frequency.
Gliel'hanno già
Is
contestato
the answer to
questo.
that yes or no?
I don't know what you mean, a single blank.
All right, let's page.
Vediamolo.
Let's keep going. All right, we'll stay at this page for a second. This is the very first box you're asked to
Prima
fill
box.
in as to, I think, a fairly fundamental question, right? What happened?
Cosa è successo?
We talked about
In
this before,
bianco.
Mr. Dennison. I
Cosa
have
è successo?
88 pages of
In
notes of what happened.
bianco.
It would have been redundant to put it there.
You know that you are obligated to produce this test in a way that other people can meaningfully review them. Yes?
The people in this case who are meaningfully reviewing them have my 88 pages of notes.
All right, but you chose to put absolutely nothing in the box, the standardized box, that said what happened.
You don't have to put it in the box if you have it somewhere else. It's
Non
not
è vero.
If
It's
it's
not
not
a standardized test?
No.
If it's not a research instrument that is used for research, if you're using it for a clinical diagnostic purpose, no, you don't. If you have that data elsewhere.
Okay.
Esatto,
Let's
Will.
go another page or so. All right. Let's go another one. All right, let's look at item 4B4.
4B4. Quale hai scritto?
And I asked you, you filled in the blank about frequency. And there's a blank in many of these items that asks number of times. You didn't fill a single one of them in, did you?
Right, because I filled them on the right side of the instrument where I am scoring it.
Dove?
And that is the way that you believe that you followed the instructions of a standardized test.
Yes, correct.
No further questions.
All right, redirect.
Very briefly.
Very briefly, per forza, hai 24 minuti. Ci credo.
Static risk factor, what did you mean by that?
Static risk factors or risk factors.
Poppy,
that don't
poppy.
change.
Esatto, si sente il poppy, poppy
Maybe,
fin da qua.
If you smoke cigarettes, you may have a risk of lung cancer, right? That's a factor that doesn't change. You can look forward if someone's smoking, you can look past if someone's smoking. So these lethality risk factors are present whether you're evaluating them in the last year or 5 years ago.
And when you're trying to assess for trauma related to the interpersonal violence that we discussed, why is it important to get a time frame in which the relationship was in existence?
Well, you want to see the amount of trauma that the person experienced. The longer
Ma appunto,
that they're in a
esattamente,
relationship,
Dodo,
you
sono
have more
d'accordo con te.
successive trauma, and one of the things that we know from the research is more trauma
E
is
adesso
not
parla con la
better. So
giuria.
the more successive traumas that you have, the greater likelihood that somebody's going to have psychological consequences and symptomatology as a result.
And therefore, you need to get it within the relationship.
Objection leading.
And so how does
Overruled.
that relate to needing to get the time frame in the relationship?
Well, you need to understand when you're trying to evaluate the impact of something, you have to understand what happened to the person. And that's sort of the core and the basis of trauma-informed care and of trauma diagnoses. You have to understand, the traumatic event and how it transpired and how it played out for that individual so that you can better assess for the symptomatology that's falling from it.
Leading è quando la domanda cerca di suggerire la risposta.
And without going into the specifics, can you just describe what was included in the 88 pages of notes?
In the 88 pages were many of the documented incidents of intimate partner
Objection, Your Honor.
violence.
she's just describing it. That came up. He said you didn't fill those in the boxes. She said it was in my 88 pages. I'm just saying what was in your 88 pages.
È la ex di lei?
I'm not
No,
asking
questa
her
è
to
la
give each of the
psicologa
specific
di lei.
events. She can describe the summary of it.
Can we come up?
Okay.
Vai, fagli perdere 2 minuti. Vai, can we come up? Guarda! La troll face! Can we come up?
Difference between clinical scoring and clinical evaluation and research evaluation with respect to the CAPS-5 and the other tests.
It's in compound.
Sustained.
È composta, doppia domanda.
Your Honor, when it's compounded, it's because it might be confusing to the jury.
Sustained, next question.
Stai obiettando contro il
Explain to
giudice?
the jury what the difference is between clinical scoring and evaluation on a test and research?
Objection, Your Honor, compound.
Overruled, good.
Questa no.
Sure, so the PCL and the CAPS-5 are frequently used in research. And when they're used in research, that means the document stands alone. They don't have 88 pages of notes to help understand the background of the trauma.
La poveretta c'ha le combo.
And why those boxes may be
Lei è
relevant
bisessuale.
in research
Amber,
is
sì, prima di Johnny aveva una moglie che tra l'altro ha picchiato, per cui è stata addirittura arrestata.
Some of that data for the research study. So that becomes very important in research.
All right, thank you, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hughes. You can have a seat in the courtroom where you're free to go, okay?
Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead
20
and
minuti
take our
rimasti.
afternoon recess. Our morning recess. Let's take our 15-minute recess. Do not discuss the case with anybody and don't do any outside research, okay?
La mascherina rosa. La mascherina rosa.
All right, why don't we just come back at 11:05 then? All right.
11:05. Fanno 20 minuti di pausa. Poggers. Poteva essere di tutti i colori, poteva essere blu come il vestito, poteva essere azzurra come la camicia. No, rosa. Tan 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 tan. Ma sono indietro di 4 minuti. Ma si fanno mezz'ora di pausa allora? Kill riepilogone. Riepilogone da dove? Da dove devo partire, chat? Da dove devo partire? È live il processo, sì. Volete che parto dall'inizio? Ma proprio dall'inizio? Allora, questo è il rispiegone. 20 minuti di tempo. Let's go. Allora, nel 2009 Johnny Depp e Amber Heard si incontrano sul set di The Rum Diary, un film dove in una scena c'è uno sviluppo romantico tra i loro due personaggi. Lo sviluppo romantico era avvenuto anche nella vita reale tra di loro. Nel 2009, durante quella scena, loro capiscono che qualcosa era scattato, che c'era dell'amore fra di loro. Nel 2012 divorzia Johnny Depp dalla sua ex moglie, la madre dei suoi figli, e iniziano a vedersi con Amber Heard. Nel 2014 viene annunciato il fidanzamento e nel 2015 celebrano il matrimonio alle Bahamas. Heard, tra parentesi, nel 2015 porta i suoi cani illegalmente in Australia e viene penalmente accusata di questo, ma poi perdonata perché Johnny Depp rimanda a casa i cani con un jet privato. Nel 2016 Amber effettua una combo pazzesca dove nell'arco di pochi giorni, combinazione quando Johnny Depp era lontano da casa, si presenta alla stazione di polizia di Los Angeles con un occhio nero e chiede un ordine restrittivo sul marito e dopodiché procede con la richiesta del divorzio. Ok? Nel 2017 si conclude il divorzio con ben 7 milioni di settlement, come si dice in italiano, di accordi. Insomma, si conclude il divorzio, Johnny Depp deve pagare 7 milioni di dollari a Amber. Amber, siccome non vuole nulla, promette di donare 3 milioni e mezzo all'ospedale dei bambini di Los Angeles e 3 milioni e mezzo all'associazione delle donne vittime di violenza, perché poverina lei è vittima di violenza. Nel 2018, circa 4 giorni prima dell'uscita di Aquaman, il primo vero ruolo importante nella carriera di Amber, Amber pubblica un articolo sul Washington Post dove sostanzialmente dice: ho parlato contro la violenza e ho subito tutta l'opinione pubblica contro di me in un sistema che protegge gli uomini. In poche parole, in quell'articolo lei diffama Johnny Depp dicendo che perpetrava violenza, bla bla bla, insomma lo dipinge come un mostro. Lei è vittima di Johnny Depp, ok? Donate to play, ci arriviamo. Nel 2019 Johnny Depp la cita a giudizio per quell'articolo, quindi il processo che stiamo vedendo oggi è partito nel 2019. Nel 2020, mentre Johnny Depp stava per girare Bestie Fantastiche, esce un articolo sul Sun, che dovrebbe essere, se non sbaglio, posseduto dalla stessa persona che possiede il Washington Post, quindi sempre solita minestra, dove l'articolo cita come può essere J.K. Rowling contenta di assumere un picchiadonne come protagonista del suo film? E Johnny Depp fa causa anche a quello, in particolare in quel caso al giornale, ma perde quella causa perché nel Regno Unito, allora in America è l'accusa che deve dimostrare la veridicità di quanto detto. Nel Regno Unito è invece la difesa che deve dimostrare l'incorrettezza di quanto detto dall'accusa. In poche parole, il Sun ha vinto nel Regno Unito perché sono riusciti a dimostrare che c'erano abbastanza prove nell'opinione pubblica per dimostrare che Johnny Depp è un violento. Di conseguenza, chiamarlo picchiamogli non era diffamatorio perché era, diciamo, passatemi il termine, di pubblico dominio il fatto che lui fosse un violento. Per cui non è che hanno tirato qualcosa di nuovo, hanno semplicemente ripetuto quello che già si sentiva dire. Il risultato è che però Johnny Depp perderà il suo ruolo nel franchise di Bestie Fantastiche proprio in seguito a quell'articolo. Viene ricastato con Mads Mikkelsen. Comunque, nel 2021 parte la controdenuncia di Amber Heard per 100 milioni di dollari, senza alcun motivo, senza alcuna base. 100 milioni di dollari tirati fuori dal cappello, mentre Johnny Depp le chiede 50 milioni, che dovrebbe essere la somma dei contratti persi tra Pirati dei Caraibi, Bestie Fantastiche e tutti i lavori indipendenti. Animali Fantastici, sì, Fantastic Beast, scusami. Animali Fantastici, sì. Nel 2022 vediamo il processo pubblico. Ok. Partiamo con i testimoni. Partiamo con l'analizzare Johnny Depp e Amber Heard. Johnny Depp nella sua testimonianza è onesto nella deposizione, non ci sono stati debunk da parte della difesa, ammette la dipendenza dalle sostanze, questo è importante per quello di cui parleremo dopo, ma nel complesso preciso, professionale e molto riflessivo in quello che dice. Controparte, Amber Heard, mare di bugie, falsifica le foto e nulla di quello che dice è di conseguenza credibile. Con questo voglio dire che in quello che dice Amber Heard potrebbe anche esserci del vero. Cioè, io non sto dicendo per forza che sono tutte cazzate. Noi non siamo la mosca che stava da loro. Mettiamo caso che Amber abbia ragione su qualcosa, comunque la sua testimonianza non può essere accolta perché dal momento che falsifica una prova, tutte potrebbero essere falsificate. Quindi il mio commento riguardo la testimonianza di Amber Heard è: falsifica le foto, nulla di quello che dice è credibile. Ok. Poi passiamo alle psicologhe. Dottoressa Curry per Johnny Depp, dottoressa Hughes che abbiamo appena visto per Amber Heard. La dottoressa Curry è professionale e diagnostica Amber Heard con disturbo della personalità e con estrema precisione sul suo comportamento che poi abbiamo rivisto paro paro durante tutta la testimonianza. Dottoressa Hughes, che abbiamo appena visto, oggi come allora, è poco professionale, di parte, testimonia a pagamento femminista, crede a Amber Heard e si somministra in maniera incorretta i test. Ora vi leggo tutti i testimoni di Johnny Depp, anzi, forse è meglio che prima vi leggo tutti i testimoni di Amber. Tutti i testimoni di Amber. Direttore del ACLU, i soldi promessi non sono mai stati pagati. Elon Musk ha pagato 500k. Attenzione, perché dopo queste dichiarazioni Amber Heard licenzia il suo PR e lo cambia mid processo. Comunque, testimoni per Amber Heard: Io Tylet Wright, Cazzaro LGBTQ, Cazzaro A, perché da quello che ho capito dovrebbe essere transgender, arrampicatore sociale, arrampicatrice sociale. Esistono online dei post dove percula il dito rotto di Johnny Depp e ha vissuto praticamente per gli ultimi anni a casa di Johnny Depp, nelle penthouse di Johnny Depp, senza chiedere neanche un euro. Johnny Depp gli ha semplicemente prestato la casa, come ha fatto con gran parte degli amici di Amber. Comunque, Io Tylet Wright è un amico caro di Amber Heard di cui esistono foto online di lui che prende in giro il dito dell'uomo che gli ha offerto una penthouse per anni senza chiedere un euro. Segue Rocky Pennington, la migliore amica di Amber, che è complice di aver falsificato le foto con lei. Le risposte sono suggerite perché abbiamo sentito in live gli avvocati di lei suggerirle le risposte. Complice, di conseguenza non attendibile. Lei era presente quando Amber ha scattato le foto. Se non sbaglio era anche presente in tribunale il giorno del TRO. Poi ha parlato Mr. Drew, l'ex marito di questa signora. Mr. Drew è l'ex di Pennington, viveva anche lui all'Eastern Columbia Building e attenzione, lui ha visto sia i danni alla casa, alla proprietà, sia le ferite su Amber, ma non ha mai visto la causa. È sempre stato tirato in ballo dall'ex moglie, non ha mai visto la causa, ha sempre solo visto danni e botte. Pareva estremamente onesto durante la sua deposizione. La mia opinione personale è che anche lui sia stato manipolato. La sorella di Amber Heard, durante la sua testimonianza, racconta: sono spesso fatta, di conseguenza non è attendibile. Mente sull'incidente sulle scale. Vi dico già che mente perché poi leggiamo le testimonianze che ha rilasciato un'altra persona, 2 persone coinvolte in quell'incidente. Comunque Amber e sua sorella raccontano una storia, tutti gli altri un'altra. Parla poi la make-up artist di Amber, professionale, onesta, ha coperto personalmente dei lividi, ma non ne conosce la causa neanche lei. Christy Sexton, insegnante di Amber Heard, che fornisce una versione diversa da quella fornita da Amber riguardo al dito. A quanto pare Amber le aveva raccontato un'altra storia. Parla poi la signorina Marz, che è un'altra amica, anche lei viveva nell'Eastern Columbia Building assieme a tutti gli altri amici di Amber a casa di Johnny. E la sua situazione è simile a quella dell'ex marito, anche lei ha visto ma non ha mai visto la causa. Segue Bruce Wiccan, compagno di gruppo musicale di Johnny Depp, che ha un'ottima memoria. Kipper lavorava, Dr. Kipper, che poi vedremo dall'altra parte, lavorava per la sobrietà di entrambi. Anche lui ha visto le ferite sul braccio, nello specifico il livido, ma sembrava una presa, non un colpo, sembrava semplicemente una presa. È amico di Johnny Depp dal 1980 e non lo ha mai visto arrabbiato. Testimoniano poliziotti, quello di Johnny Depp ne parliamo poi. Parla Tracy Jacobs, ex agente di Johnny Depp, che ha detto che è diventato la big star in the world, rancorosa verso Johnny Depp perché è stata licenziata. Non ha mai visto niente e di parte poco attendibile, ma comunque non ha mai visto niente. Segue Joe Mandel, business manager di Johnny Depp, che sostanzialmente dice che Johnny Depp spendeva tanto. Adam Waldman, avvocato di Johnny Depp, in corso d'opera, non ha potuto dire niente perché è segreto professionale, quindi interrogazione ridicola. Ma quello che ha potuto dire è che ha visto che Amber Heard dichiara il falso e i testimoni sono di parte. Ha parlato con uno youtuber e ha portato un faldone di prove alla LAPD investigarla per spergiuro. Ok? Parla poi detective... Questi sono tutti per Amber, quindi pensate quante cose poco utili hanno fatto per Amber. Parla poi detective Sandenago, detective del LAPD, che è responsabile della divisione che si occupa di violenza domestica e dichiara che we have no crime, non c'è crimine. Tutto il lavoro svolto nel maggio del 2015 nell'incidente delle scale di cui sopra è stato svolto correttamente. Parla poi Ron Schnell, ricercatore estremamente qualificato, analista e consulente di social media, correlazioni tra fatti e odio verso Amber Heard. Debunked è quello dei Twitter, è quello che ha analizzato gli hashtag in maniera estremamente grossolana, che è stato poi smontato dall'accusa. Parla poi Michelle Mulrooney, che è una Karen, lasciate perdere. Parla poi Tina Newman, produttore esecutivo di Disney, che non sa nulla. Amber Heard non riesce a dimostrare che Pirati 6 non esiste. Parla poi Ellen Barkin, attrice, incontra Johnny Depp nel 1990, anche lei ex bramante, per cui di parte ha molto rancore nei confronti di Johnny Depp. Avvocato di lei, testimonianza inutile riguardo l'op-ed cercando di salvare la faccia. Ha testimoniato un avvocato cercando di piegare l'attenzione sull'articolo per cui Johnny la fallisce, la cita in giudizio, ma il giudice ha spento tutto. Parla poi Jessica Kosovic, agente di Amber Heard, che parla di come abbia perso il ruolo. Niente boom dopo Aquaman, questo però non è colpa del fatto che Johnny l'abbia accusata, è colpa dell'incompetenza di Amber. Parla Richard Moore, medico della mano, che smentisce la storia di Depp del dito, ma Camille lo smonta. Parla David Spiegel, medico psichiatra, Dr. Brown, il matto pazzo, che contesta la qualifica di esperto, imbecille, parla in generale senza analizzare nel dettaglio nulla e viene anche lui smontato dall'accusa. Catherine Arnold, esperta talent publicist esperta di gossip, il 50% della sua carriera è fare il testimone full time e dichiara che, secondo lei, Amber Heard ha perso 48 milioni di dollari in potenziali lavori. Ne riparleremo di questo. Parla poi Julian Adert, esperto forense di computer, pagato, falso, smentito, e ritorna, quello che abbiamo visto stamattina, e poi ritorna la dottoressa Hughes, che abbiamo appena visto la figura di merda che ha fatto. Passiamo a Johnny Depp. Per Johnny Depp parla la dottoressa Curry, ve ne ho parlato, dopodiché parla, la prima testimone è stata la Catherine, insomma, sua sorella, che semplicemente non ho considerato la sua testimonianza perché, come per la sorella di Amber Heard, è talmente vicina alla persona che sta parlando per cui non l'ho considerata. Parla però poi Dr. Kipper, cura Depp. Attenzione, perché io ho saltato nel tempo, io vi ho letto tutte le testimonianze fino ad oggi. Adesso torniamo a leggerci gli appunti che avevo preso riguardo i testimoni di Johnny e vediamo se anticipano delle cose di cui abbiamo già parlato dopo, confermano delle cose di cui abbiamo già parlato dopo. Dr. Kipper cura Johnny Depp, visita Amber Heard senza riscontrare nulla, era il loro medico per la riabilitazione dalle droghe. Parla poi Laurel Anderson, terapista di coppia, che ha visto abuso mutuale nella relazione verbale, ma nota che Depp è sempre quello che cerca di calmare la situazione. Parla poi Ben King, responsabile dell'Eastern Columbia Building, che ha visto i danni e trovato il dito di Johnny Depp in un fazzoletto. Quindi parla poi Jack Wigman, manager di Johnny Depp, che dichiara Johnny Depp ha perso dei lavori in conseguenza a quello che è successo. Parla poi un analista di Google, che è quello che abbiamo rivisto anche l'altro giorno, che conferma la correlazione articolo boom negativo nella stampa di Johnny Depp. Parla poi Steve Baruch, il miglior amico di Johnny Depp, che ha letto i messaggi di Johnny Depp incazzato, post relazione, ma ha visto un filmato di Amber Heard, che c'è nelle prove, ha visto un filmato di Amber Heard nell'ascensore con la sorella fingere di picchiarsi. Parla poi Siccarino, ex manager di Johnny Depp, che ha perso i pirati senza preavviso. Parla poi Sterling Jenkins, ex marine degli Stati Uniti e bodyguard di Johnny Depp, che sa che Amber Heard è responsabile della cacca perché gliel'ha sentito dire. Parole sue. scorta Amber Heard a Coachella e la soccorre dopo un eccesso di funghi allucinogeni e cose del genere. Parla poi Travis McGivern, altro bodyguard di Johnny Depp presente il giorno dell'incidente sulle scale. Bodyguard ha visto Amber Heard lanciare una Red Bull, la seconda l'ha parata personalmente e ha visto il pugno di Amber in contatto contro lo zigomo di Johnny Depp sulle scale, dopodiché ha portato via Johnny Depp. Parla poi il manager dell'isola delle Bahamas. Johnny Depp è sempre stato molto educato, Amber Heard è una stronza. Nulla da reportare. Abbiamo delle clip di come Amber Heard trattava i suoi dipendenti e sottoposti e confermo questa testimonianza. Parlano poi le 2 squadre di polizia che hanno risposto ai reclami di Maggio, dove la prima squadra dice la casa era a posto, ma non c'era nessun crimine da riportare. La seconda squadra dice la casa era in disordine, non abbiamo niente da riportare, quindi tra una chiamata e l'altra la casa è stata messa in disordine da Amber. Ci sono le bodycam di entrambe le squadre. Parla poi Malcolm Connolly, bodyguard nel Regno Unito. Lei era manesca. Parla poi Richard Marks, dealmaker, tosto, riconosce la correlazione accuse-danno e smonta Rottenborn. Richard Marks è quell'uomo con la voce molto profonda di ieri, quello che fa i contratti a Hollywood. Parla poi Debbie Lloyd, l'infermiera che secondo Amber si è presa la lattina di Red Bull lanciata da Johnny sulle scale, mentre è stata lei a lanciare la lattina. E l'infermiera stessa dice: ero sulle scale, non sono mai stata colpita da nessuna lattina. Parla poi Walter Amada, direttore generale della divisione cinematografica di Warner Bros., che dichiara che Amber Heard non ha perso il ruolo perché Johnny Depp ha parlato male di lei, ha perso il ruolo per incompetenza e mancanza di chimica con Jason Momoa. Parla poi il medico della mano di Johnny Depp, che insomma conferma tutto quello che è stato fatto su di lui. Parla poi Richard Marks di nuovo per la seconda volta per rispondere alle accuse mosse dalla Arnold, l'esperta che ha detto che Amber ha perso 48 milioni. Sostanzialmente dice che non esiste né in cielo né in terra perché il contratto che aveva Amber Heard era già estremamente generoso per i suoi oltre 50 anni di esperienza, per cui una ricontrattazione del contratto è probabilmente poco credibile. È un'ipotesi che ha tirato fuori l'altra esperta, ma lui dice in 50 anni di esperienza un contratto del genere non l'ho mai visto rinegoziare. Parla poi Michael Spinder, che è l'analista forense dei danni, e dichiara che appunto la stima di 50 milioni di Johnny è buona. Torna l'esperto di Google che distrugge l'analisi degli hashtag. Parla poi testimone speciale oculare di Hicksville, il proprietario dell'hotel con le roulotte dove secondo Amber Johnny Depp l'ha violentata performando una ricerca delle cavità per cercare dei sacchetti di droga all'interno di Amber, totalmente smentito. Anzi, secondo questo testimone oculare, era Amber a essere violenta e a essere molto molto adirata quel giorno. Parla poi Dr. Schultz, muti un attimo.
All right, are we ready for the jury?
Parla poi Dr. Schultz, psichiatra, medico. Parla della Goldwater Rule e distrugge il pazzo dell'altro giorno. Parla Jennifer Howell, ex boss di Whitney, che non ha mai visto né sentito nulla riguardo alle scale. Parla poi il rappresentante dell'ospedale dei bambini di Los Angeles, che dice non sono mai arrivati i soldi da Amber Heard, non ha mai pagato niente, li ha solo promessi, ma non sono ancora arrivati. Adesso arriviamo alla domanda su Momoa. Parla poi Kate Moss, che smentisce il discorso dell'accusa di Kate Moss delle scale, sempre per riguardo le scale. Torna la dottoressa Curry, che smonta quella che ha parlato prima, e abbiamo visto che appunto non è bastato. La sua dichiarazione sostanzialmente è che appunto i test sono stati somministrati in maniera scorretta e Amber Heard ha esagerato nel rilascio di alcune informazioni. Torna Johnny Depp che racconta che è stato lui a raccomandare Ambra per Aquaman. E parla poi Morgan Tremaine, ex impiegato di TMZ, il giga Chad biondo con le unghie nere, che ha sfondato la giuria dicendo non è vero che lei nel 2016 non ha avvisato nessuno, ha avvisato noi. Io ho mandato i paparazzi a farle la foto quando usciva dal tribunale per il divorzio. Parla poi Newmeister, il dio dei metadata che ha smerdato tutte le foto. Parla poi Beverly Leonard, ex operatrice dall'aeroporto, che ha visto Amber Heard picchiare la ex. E parla quindi il dottor Gilbert, esperto della mano, che conferma la storia di Johnny Depp per il dito. In tutto questo mancano 20 minuti alla fine del tempo per la difesa e circa 6 ore per Johnny Depp. «20 minuti di riassunto senza parlare. Vado a prendermi un sorso d'acqua, ragazzi». Dito di Depp, lei ha tirato una bottiglia di vodka contro la sua mano mentre era appoggiato a un bancone, lui ha tolto la mano, è stato pizzicato dalla bottiglia e gli è stata completamente amputata mezza falange. Arrivo. Cosa fanno? Dopo la prossima pausa analizziamo gli incidenti di cui ha parlato, che sono principalmente 3 incidenti, e li smontiamo uno per uno. La mia tariffa, una scatola di 7,62. Il 90% degli spettatori in tribunale sono donne che sono lì per guardare Johnny Depp.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. All right, your next witness.
Quindi è amazing.
Your Honor, defendant calls Amber Heard.
All right, if you come to the
20
stand,
minuti
please.
hai. Parla veloce, signorina.
Yes, ma'am. Water.
Non ti ho detto di che marca, però. Ornadi, sberla.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a reminder, you're still under oath, okay?
Of course, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, your question?
Oggi è l'ultimo giorno, domani le arringhe.
Amber, just to orient you and the jury, at this time, we are in the rebuttal to your counterclaim against Mr. Depp. So I'm going to confine my questions to that, okay?
Ok, quindi è lì solo per dichiarare che...
You suffered publicly as a result
È
of
qui
the death
solo
of
per i
the
100 milioni che vuole, eh?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Non ho neanche... Lacrime.
I am harassed, humiliated, threatened every single day. Even just walking into this courtroom, sitting here in front of the world, having the worst parts of my life, things I've lived through, used to humiliate me. People want to kill me, and they tell me so every day.
E non è forse una conseguenza delle
People
tue
want to put
azioni?
my baby in the microwave, and they tell me that. Johnny
Non è forse una conseguenza di quello che fai?
threatened, promised me that if I ever left him, he'd
Ha
make me
appena
think of
usato
him
la sua bambina,
every single day.
concepita tra l'altro in vitro, l'anno scorso, come arma.
I'll sustain the objection as to that, if you want to ask the question.
Non piange più? Boom. Ferma.
Amber, how did Mr. Depp's statements and threats to you
Seria.
that you were discussing, how do those continue to manifest themselves today?
Piangi.
in the harassment, in the humiliation, the campaign against me that's echoed every single day on social media and now in front of cameras in this room. Every single day I have to relive the trauma. My hands shake. I wake up screaming. I have to live with the trauma and the damage done to me. My friends have to live with a set of unspoken rules about how to not scare me.
Objection, hearsay.
Yes, sir.
Unspoken rules
Overruled. Go ahead.
about how to not touch me, not to surprise me. My intimate partners have rules about how they can deal with me, how they can touch me. I have rules for doctors and medical professionals I see, gynecologists I see. I live my life with these sets of
quarter mile at a
rules I
time.
have to follow, my friends have to follow for me not to have a panic attack or a triggering event where I relive the trauma. Even if I'm training to do my movie, for instance,
Sì.
if I'm training for Aquaman.
Vuoi vedere una clip da Aquaman mentre picchi tutti senza problemi?
Happens, I have a meltdown and have to deal with that. The crew I work with have to deal with that because of the damage I walk around with every single day from what I've lived through, from what I've survived. I'm not sitting in this courtroom snickering. I'm not sitting in this courtroom laughing, smiling, and making snide jokes.
Ah no?
I'm not.
Ah
This
no?
is horrible.
Ah no? L'hai fatto
This
ieri.
is painful. And this is humiliating for any human being to go through.
Dai?
And perhaps it's easy to forget that, but I'm a human being.
Ah sì?
And even though Johnny promised that I deserve this and promised he'd do this, I don't deserve this. I want to move on. The statements, the attacks on me, the campaign, that Johnny has elicited millions of people to do on his behalf when he himself
Objection, Your Honor,
couldn't
lack
do
of
it.
foundation.
Sustained.
Speculation.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Amber, how have the Depp-Waldman statements impacted your ability
Un cazzo perché sei
to do
incapace.
charitable work?
You know, the only reason that people like Dr. Curry can sit up here on the stand and say I'm high functioning and I do things like have hobbies and have interests is
Objection,
because I'm not.
non-responsive.
Your Honor,
Stava
Mr. Depp
preparando
gave
l'argomento,
long-winded
rispondi.
responses yesterday.
Overruled. Go ahead.
It's because I found a solution to that pain. I woke up every morning with panic attacks and trauma
urli?
until I realized I could do something with it. So to answer your question, Ben,
Come si sta
I
tenendo
was
lui?
able to turn the things that I've lived through, my pain, my life experiences, into work, into action, into providing a voice.
Se adesso
for
dice
other
qualcosa
people.
sulle donne.
I'm not a saint. I'm not trying to present myself as one, as you all know, but I selfishly found relief.
E non è colpa mia se ho problemi intestinali.
I've lived through to advocate for others.
Shut
To
up.
bring light to these issues, to give a voice to people who don't have the voice and the platform that I have. And while I would not wish this situation on my worst enemy, if it gives a voice to someone who doesn't have it. But I now, as I stand here today, can't have a career. I can't even have people associate with me because of the threats and the attacks that they have to endure.
Objection,
when they are.
non-responsive.
And I can't do my charity work.
Sustain the objection.
Ha detto che lei
Amber, other than
è
the
vittima
threats
come
you
tutte le altre
described,
donne,
what
vero?
other threats have you endured since the Depp-Waldman statements were made?
I receive hundreds of death threats regularly, if not daily. Thousands since this trial.
Dove Will Smith quando serve?
Mocking my testimony about being assaulted. Making fun of my...
Objection, relevance. Non-responsive.
What's the damages?
A 60 hanno
You can
finito.
continue.
It's been agonizing. Agonizing. Painful, and the most humiliating thing I've ever had to go through. I hope no one ever has to go through something like this. I just want Johnny to leave me alone. I just want him to leave me alone. I've said that for years now.
Signora! Le lacrime, signora!
Non-responsive.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Sustained, bitch! Vai avanti.
What do you hope to reclaim after this is over?
Sentite anche la recita dell'avvocato, madonna.
Protecting the secret that I
Il segreto
did for as
di
long as I
Fatima.
did has taken enough of my voice. Johnny has taken enough of my voice. I have the right to tell my story. I have the right to say what happened to me.
Tell my
I have the
story?
right to my voice and my name.
L'hai detto finora.
He took it long enough. I have a right as an American to talk about what happened to me.
Pure,
to
primo
own my
emendamento.
story and my truth.
America, motherfuckers!
I have that right.
I'm from Texas, bitch!
I hope to get my voice back.
The American dream, people! Women!
And I've said that to
Giants!
everyone.
America!
Thank you, Amber. I don't have any
Grazie, grazie.
Cross-examination.
Grazie, grazie mille, grazie, grazie. Hanno 12 minuti.
Actually, Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes, yes.
Lo so, King. Madonna, ora la menano in là. No, è Camille. È Camille. A Camille, I want to pay my pledge in piccole comode rate da 12 euro. No, ma allora... Non piange... No, ma come fai? Allora, spezzo una lancia a suo favore. Cos'altro può fare? A questo punto. A questo punto, cosa può fare? Al di là delle risposte stupide. Piangere realmente. Lo sapete che la signorina Christy Sexton, l'insegnante in Australia di recitazione, ha detto che doveva ritardare le lezioni di oltre un'ora perché lei a quanto pare piangeva sempre prima di arrivare a lezione, ma stranamente aveva grandi problemi a piangere poi a comando. Ah. Questa donna ha problemi a piangere a comando. Bellissimo. Se fosse una donna, assolutamente. Quello che sta facendo lei è dannoso per tutte le donne che soffrono veramente di queste cose qua. Ci riassumi quello che ha detto? Sono una persona vera, la gente mi minaccia di cose brutte e non riesco a vivere, mi sveglio di notte urlando, ho gli incubi, non riesco a fare i film. E durante le riprese di Aquaman, quando dovevo picchiare qualcuno, mi venivano i flashback del Vietnam. E sono americana, per cui ho diritto a parlare. Fuck yeah! E viva lo zio Sam, viva l'America e basta. Va bene, nessuno. Sono americana. E il bello è che durante l'intera Gatorade gargling. E il bello è che mentre lo faceva, ovviamente piangeva quando guardava la giuria, serissima quando guardava il giudice, neutra quando guardava l'avvocato, incazzata quando guardava Camille. Quindi lei ha delle zone di sentimento per cui c'è serietà, neutralità, rabbia e pianto. Quindi praticamente fa così. In base all'angolo. TikTok. E in teoria la controesamina questa. Ha steppato In teoria la controesamina, quindi, ma il tempo ormai è fatto, cioè loro hanno 12 minuti per la ridirezione, ma tanto non diranno niente. Cioè adesso Camille chiacchierano un po', Camille dirà qualcosa per smontare la sua figura e dopodiché Rottenborg ci avrà 12 minuti per dire non è tutto vero, non è vero che hai detto così nel 71, è vero? Che tuo papà nella terza elementare, quando il quarto giorno del solstizio d'inverno ha detto così, è vero? Quindi, ok, sì, è vero? Perfetto, non ho altre domande. Ormai è fatta. Drake. Della ghiera, esatto. Battista. Ripeto, d'altro canto lei non poteva fare altrimenti. Esatto, canta, esatto. Cioè, lei non poteva fare altrimenti. Cioè, ormai ha portato una farsa fino ad oggi. Cosa poteva fare? Salire? Allora, poteva non salire. Per quanto mi riguarda, poteva non salire. Ma è normale, per quanto riguarda la teatralità dei processi americani, cercare di convincere in maniera spudorata la giuria prima di chiudere. Cioè, del resto l'ha fatto anche Johnny. Anche Johnny è risalito solo per concludere la sua storia e uscirsene come voleva uscirsene lui. Lei ha fatto lo stesso, del resto non potevamo aspettarci che salisse qui e dire scusate, era uno scherzo, volevo vedere come reagivate, in realtà è tutto uno scherzo e sono stata io, grazie. Cioè, è logico. Ma vincerà... Porca puttana! Signora, tutto... Tutto ok? Signora, eh, signora, tutto bene? Quella è la sorella. Lei è un evento di tacco. Minchia, signora, ma cioè, non le ho detto mica niente, stavo parlando di sua sorella, mica di lei. Riuscirà a vincere Johnny? Non lo so, perché... Allora, sì, per me sì, Johnny Depp ha citato in giudizio Amber per le dichiarazioni false nell'articolo del 2018. Ha dimostrato che ogni cosa che esce dalla sua bocca è falsa. Per me sì, per me deve vincere, ma non sono nella giuria. Non sono nella giuria. Mi fido della giuria, non li conosco. Esatto, Mac, esatto. Ci guarderemo anche un giorno in pretura, Trogo. Bel tentativo, DC. Impossibile che vengano corrotti. Corrotti da chi? Se vogliono fare una gara di corruzione, penso che vinca Johnny in termini di budget. Come è iniziato oggi a bomba. Sì, certo, vado a casa sua, Kaiser. No, fanno la coda per entrare, Armando. Sono tutti pro Depp. Tutti quanti quelli del pubblico sono pro Depp. Della radio, pazzezio. Lei 50 milioni da dove li tira fuori si è veramente messa male. Allora, torniamo al discorso di chi ha detto Johnny Depp ha già vinto. Johnny Depp ha già vinto, nel senso che io penso che non gliene freghi un cazzo dei 50 milioni. Cioè, i 50 milioni è giusto per aggiungere un po' di pepe, ma non gliene frega un cazzo. L'obiettivo di Johnny Depp era raccontare la sua storia e ha avuto un teatro pubblico come ce ne sono stati pochi nella storia di queste cose qua. Cioè, veramente, il processo con tanta attenzione così è stato forse quello di O.J. Simpson tanti anni fa. La sua... ma neanche tanto riscattare l'immagine, il suo obiettivo era solo dire la sua e poi il resto lo avrebbero fatto le parole, e lo hanno fatto le parole, perché Johnny Depp penso che ha un picco di popolarità come pochi prima d'ora. Cioè, il prossimo film che tocca Johnny Depp è un successo. È un successo pazzesco. Come dici, sì, poi adesso può pure perdere, perché, ripeto, Johnny Depp non sta facendo un processo penale per le violenze, sta facendo un processo civile per diffamazione. Può pure perdere, non importa. Ognuno di loro due ha avuto quello che si merita. Il discorso è stato da parte sua: ah sì? Vuoi dire al mondo com'era la nostra relazione? Vuoi sputtanarmi per com'era la nostra relazione? Balliamo. Quindi la loro relazione è più pubblica del pubblico e adesso siamo noi a dover fare le nostre conclusioni e le abbiamo fatte. Non gli ripropongono Pirati Legione, Disney non torna indietro su queste cose. Disney non torna indietro su queste cose. Non entriamo nella marcitudine di Disney, per favore, perché è ancora peggio di così. Però è uscito anche il marcio di lui. Verissimo, ma è proprio quello che ti stavo dicendo, Valentina. Lui non aveva nulla da perdere. Cioè, lui ormai, peggio di così, è uscito il marcio di lui. Mi stai dicendo che il marcio che è uscito adesso è peggio di quello di cui lo accusavano prima? No. Dire che sei un tossico drogato può avere dei problemi di immagine per quanto riguarda la tua gestione di te stesso, le tue scelte, ma è diverso da dire che sei un violentatore, stupratore, eccetera. È ben diverso. Senza contare che più o meno tutte le rockstar e le persone di quel calibro lì hanno avuto esperienze di quel tipo, problemi di quel tipo, per cui marcio, non è uscito niente di marcio riguardo al maltrattamento delle donne, nulla, tutt'altro. Valentina, finora il marcio che è uscito di lui che cosa è stato? Le droghe, perché i messaggi dell'altro giorno, seppur maleducati e tutto, ma io glieli perdono, ma porca miseria, ma chi di noi, donne e uomini, chi di noi non ha mai scritto un messaggio incazzato nero contro qualcuno? Chi di noi non ha mai augurato le peggio cose a qualcuno? Col cellulare. Immaginate dare il cellulare alla giuria e esaminare tutti i messaggi che avete mai mandato. Volete dirmi che non uscirebbe qualcosa di problematico? Non ne ho idea, non l'ho mai avuta una Raspberry, Filippo. Grazie dei 6 mesi, Toma. Cancello la cronologia, non serve, te la beccano di solito. Io scrivo solo sì, no, ok. Da adesso in poi. Touch Air with a Glove, la Saber. Allora, io, guarda, Valentina è una ragazza, quindi io non ho tanta esperienza come ragazza perché sono nato maschio, ma da maschio ti posso dire che io sicuramente nella mia vita ho detto ad altre persone quello stronzo di merda gli passasse sopra il pullman, cioè ho sicuramente augurato del male grave ad altre persone in momenti di rabbia parlando con dei miei amici, sicuramente, ma sono sicuro che anche tu lo avrai fatto, sono sicuro. Anche solo una conversazione dove dici quella stronza di merda, spero che la espellano dalla scuola, cioè è normale, quasi un bimbo, a 9 un bimbo, Cerro.
Quasi un bimbo.
Mai fatto Toblerone? Esatto, anche la guida. Mai. Saresti disposto a darmi il tuo cellulare? Nick, grazie del Prime. Avete capito cosa intendo col discorso di augurare male? Non nel senso... Avete capito cosa dico? In maniera anche solo discorsiva lo abbiamo fatto tutti. Non ci credo che non l'ha fatto nessuno di noi. Non ci posso credere che non abbiate mai beccato uno stronzo a scuola. Drake.
Ms. Heard, you just testified that this case has been
Sicuro,
very
Toble.
hard for you. So let's talk about that and why.
Let's talk about that.
All right. Your lies have been exposed to the world multiple times, right?
I haven't lied about anything I've been here to say.
Non ho mentuto nulla.
You sat here and told this jury that the events in Hicksville started with Mr. Depp getting really upset about a woman leaning on you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's effectively what happened, yeah.
You testified that he actually grabbed that woman's wrist and twisted it, right?
And told her that he could effectively break her wrist by saying
Torre,
how
grazie
many
dei
pounds of
27.
pressure, or asking her how many pounds of pressure it took to break a human wrist.
But your own witness, your former best friend, Rocky Pennington, she didn't corroborate that, did she?
I'm not quite sure what part of that night she saw. There were a lot of people there.
She didn't testify that Mr. Depp grabbed anyone's wrist in Hicksville.
Again, I don't know what Rocky saw. There were a lot of people there that night.
You testified that once you brought Mr. Depp back to your trailer, he trashed it, correct?
That is correct.
And the manager of the Hicksville trailer park was furious that Johnny had wrecked the whole thing. Do you remember that testimony?
That's correct.
Well, we heard from that manager
Pixel,
of the
grazie
Hicksville trailer
infinite.
park, Morgan Knight, on Monday, didn't we?
I'm not quite sure who that guy was or if he had any involvement in this. I know a lot of people have come out of the woodwork to be involved.
Sta dicendo che non...
So you're accusing Mr. Knight of testifying and committing perjury?
I'm not accusing anyone. I just don't recognize that man.
You heard Mr. Knight testify that it was actually you who was upset with Mr.
Sta
Depp
dicendo
spending
che...
time away from him. Isn't that correct?
How would he know? He wasn't
Gilly,
there.
grazie dei 5 mesi.
You heard Mr. Knight testify that it was actually you who was yelling at Mr. Depp.
Again, I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things to be involved in the Johnny Depp show, but he wasn't there.
Wow!
And he certainly doesn't know what happened behind closed doors,
Wow!
like most people.
So you're calling Mr. Knight a liar?
I am saying he wasn't there, and what he testified to
Wow!
doesn't match what I know happened.
Wow!
But I don't fault him. He wasn't there, so how would he know?
He testified he was there, Ms. Heard. Did you hear that?
That's his testimony, yes.
So you're calling him a liar?
I'm just saying he wasn't there.
You heard Mr. Knight testify that the trailer wasn't trashed, and that's why you're calling him a liar.
He testified that a light fixture was
Donne,
broken,
grazie mille.
similar to the way that
Yes,
Johnny's
other than a light
employees
fixture.
testified.
Grazie mille del regalo.
Was it being rearranged and things
Ms.
like
Heard,
that?
My
the
questions.
only thing that was broken in the trailer, according to Mr. Knight, was a light fixture. Yes or no?
I realized that he summed it up by saying a light fixture was broken, just the way his security guard summed up me trashing my closet as being rearranged.
Your Honor, I'm
Revlight,
going to
grazie mille anche a te dei
strike
5.
everything after he summed it up, that it was a light fixture,
Ok,
as non-responsive.
She answered the question, Your Honor.
grazie mille Revlight.
Overruled.
In the security guard testimony, Your Honor?
I'll allow it. Go ahead.
Mr. Knight also testified that he charged Mr. Depp only $62 for the damage
$62
light
per
fixture. You
la,
heard that,
per la
correct?
plafoniera. Per la
In Hicksville, you
plafoniera.
were the only one that was jealous that Mr. Depp was spending time with
Minca!
Isn't that correct, Ms. Heard?
That is incorrect.
In Hicksville, you were the one who was upset that Mr. Depp wasn't giving you enough attention.
Incorrect again.
Ms. Heard, you told this jury that you had no idea the press was going to be at the courthouse when you got your TRO on May 27,
TMZ, motherfucker!
2016. Do you remember that testimony?
I said I did not have anything to do with it. Yes.
No. My question again. You told this jury that you had no idea that the press was going to be outside after you got the ex-party TRO on May 27th, 2016. Do you remember that testimony?
I apologize. I must have misunderstood Ms. Vasquez. I actually had no idea whether they were going to be there or not. When I walked into the courtroom that day, it was completely quiet, still, empty. Even though I had given Johnny's team notice that I was filing the
Objection,
TRO,
Your Honor, this is not
we had
responsive.
no reason to
Move to
believe the
strike.
press knew.
And Your Honor, I would also ask that you instruct the witness to please stop talking once I lodge an objection.
Your Honor, she's trying to answer the question as best she can, and Ms. Vasquez is misrepresenting to her what she testified to.
Well, I'll strike the last part as non-responsive. Just if you could just answer the questions asked. Okay, thank you, Ms. Hurd.
Ultimo avvertimento, stronza.
In fact, you testified that you were, quote, shocked when you saw press when you were leaving the courthouse. Yes?
Yes.
You weren't shocked at all, though, were you?
Incorrect. It was
You knew the press
horrifying.
would be at the courthouse, right, Ms. Hurd?
No.
Well, you did bring your publicist to the courthouse with you on May 27th,
Ave-
2016,
sì.
didn't you?
I sure did. I'm a public figure. I brought my publicist in case it blew up.
Nel caso, eh?
You actually
Nel-
had
I did.
alerted TMZ that you would be filing a TRO against Mr. Depp that very day,
No, I did
didn't
not.
you?
No, I did
The
not.
one
Il
day
tizio di
you
ieri
went
non era
to wear
nessuno.
makeup to cover up the mark on your face.
I did not call TMZ or any other news source or paparazzi source. No one.
Well,
I
we
never
heard
did that.
testimony from former TMZ employee Morgan Tremaine yesterday, correct?
Did I hear his testimony?
Yes.
Yes, I was here.
Yes. And you heard Mr. Tremaine's testimony that he knew to dispatch the paparazzi to the courthouse on May 27th, right?
I heard him say that he knew that, yes.
Yeah, and that he dispatched paparazzi to the courthouse to capture a picture of an alleged bruise on the right side of your
La
face.
giuria,
Do you remember
guarda.
him saying that?
I remember him saying that.
That information must have come from your team, right, Ms. Hurd?
Absolutely not.
No.
Why
no.
would I want that? What actual survivor of domestic violence wants that?
Now, the video of Mr.
Ma
Depp eating up
vaffanculo,
some
va.
kitchen cabinets, you admit that you took that video, correct?
Yes, I did.
Right. And you acknowledge that the video was released online the day before you were deposed in connection with your divorce from Mr. Depp in August of 2016, right?
I believe it was, yes.
But you testified that you had absolutely nothing to do with the video's release, right?
Absolutely not.
And you testified that you learned about it when you landed after flying into LA. Do you remember that testimony?
Upon touchdown is when I was alerted to the video's
You
existence
heard Mr.
online.
Tremaine testify that about this video as well yesterday, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you heard Mr. Tremaine testify that TMZ received the cabinet video the same day you landed at LAX, yes?
I don't know if that's what his testimony was. I'm sorry.
You heard Mr. Tremaine testify that the cabinet video was posted 15 minutes after TMZ received it, yes?
That's what I heard him say.
And that this could only have been possible if the video was received directly from the source, yes?
I heard him say that. I don't know if that's true or if that's possible because
And you
it didn't
heard
come from me. I was
Mr.
flying.
Tremaine
So
testify.
I know that's incorrect is what I mean to say.
Another liar on the stand.
I just know that that's incorrect.
And you heard Mr. Tremaine testify that TMZ owns the copyright to the cabinet video, right?
That's news to me.
The cabinet video you filmed of your then husband, yes?
The copyright ownership of that is news to me. I learned that yesterday.
It's the cabinet video that you captured of your then husband, yes?
That is correct. I did capture that video, and
The
yes,
cabinet
that was
video-
my husband.
The same cabinet video that was released the night before you were deposed in your divorce, yes?
That's correct.
You must have also heard Mr. Tremaine testify that the version of the cabinet video that TMZ received was incomplete compared to the video. the
Già,
jury
mancava
saw
la
on the
parte
track.
in cui
Did you
giravi
hear
tu?
that?
The video that you have seen is complete.
Right. But
Sì,
the one
è
TMZ
quell'altro
got
che non era
the day
completo.
before your
Alex, grazie
deposition
2
in
mesi.
divorce was incomplete.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
He testified that at the beginning portion of the video where you set up the camera,
Secondo te
that
vedremo
wasn't
la nuova
included in the
scavenger
video
nella
that
partita
TMZ
di
received.
Tarkov?
I don't know what video TMZ
I'm talking
received.
about Mr. Tremaine's testimony, Ms. Hurd. Let's just
So you're
focus on
asking me to
Mr.
repeat
Tremaine.
his testimony?
No, I'm asking you if you recall hearing him say those words to this jury.
Yes,
Under oath.
I heard his testimony. We all did.
And he testified that the end of the video where you can be seen smirking. I know you testified earlier that you haven't been smirking in this trial, but you sure were caught on camera smirking in that video.
I disagree with that.
Was also not included in the TMZ video.
Everyone can watch that video and you can determine whether you think it's funny to me or not.
Non ti
That's
preoccupare,
because the
l'abbiamo
video came
visto.
from you, right, Ms. Hurd?
No, it did not.
You
That
edited
video
out
did
the
not
portions.
come to me.
Ms. Hurd,
Come from me.
Ms. Hurd, you edited out the portions that made you look bad before sending it to TMZ.
You're very wrong about that.
So
If
that
I
only
wanted to
Mr.
leak
Depp
information, I
looked
could have
bad.
done it in a more effective way, a lot sooner and a lot more.
Because
I
you
was
knew exactly
living
how to
with
do
a
that,
mountain
right?
of this evidence. If I wanted to leak it, I could have done a lot more with it.
I thought you testified earlier in this trial that you didn't know how to leak things.
I
Remember
don't.
that? You edited that video before you gave it to TMZ so that only Mr. Depp would look bad. Yes?
That's absurd.
Right in the middle of your divorce proceedings.
Again, you're very wrong.
I'd like to show you a picture from that's already admitted into evidence. It's Defendant's Exhibit 799. This is you at the courthouse on May 27th, 2016, when you got your domestic violence
Non
restraining
posso
order
tradurre a
against
questa
Mr. Depp,
velocità,
right?
ve lo traduco dopo.
And next to you is a woman named Jody Gottlieb, right?
Yes, yes.
Jody Gottlieb is your publicist.
È la tua
My dear
pubblicitaria.
Now I'd like to show you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1316. This is a picture of you and your friend Rocky Pennington, right?
That is correct.
Your
Non lo
Honor, I'd
vedo.
like to move to admit.
Ulteriori prove, anche adesso.
No, Your Honor.
All right, 1316 in evidence, you can publish to the jury.
This is a picture of you on May 28th, 2016, right, Ms. Heard?
I don't know when this was taken.
This is the day after you obtained the domestic violence restraining order against Mr. Depp, right?
Non c'è più
I have no idea.
Il giorno dopo non c'è più livido.
There's no bruise on your face in this picture, is there?
Again, I don't know when this was taken.
Il giorno
and also,
dopo.
I'm outside. I was obviously wearing makeup. I have no idea when this was taken.
Senza-
so I have no
c'ha il
idea
make-up,
Let's
dove?
refresh your
what
recollection.
bruise you-
Dov'è il
Let's
make-up?
refresh your recollection about when this picture was taken. Can we please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 1315, just for the witness?
Solo per...
This is an article dated May 30th, 2016, right, Ms. Heard?
That's what it says, yes.
And this article contains the same photograph of you and Miss Pennington we were just looking at, yes?
Yes, I see that.
And the article is entitled, Amber Heard Smiles as She Puts Arm Around Friend One Day After Getting Restraining Order Against Johnny Depp. Is that what the title says?
I know that's what the title says, yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to move to admit and
Fammelo-
publish
fammi
the article
vedere.
with everything but the headline and date and the photo redacted.
Fammi vedere.
Objection, Your Honor. That's inconsistent from the way you've treated all of these.
I'll sustain the objection. All right, next question.
Let's take a look at picture Plaintiff's Exhibit 1317. This is also a picture of you and Miss Pennington on May 28th, 2016, isn't it?
I don't know when this
No,
photo was
non lo
taken,
so.
but it looks like the same outing as the picture prior.
Your Honor, I'm going to move to admit and publish Plaintiff's Exhibit 1317.
Any objection?
No, Your
All
Honor.
right, 1317 in evidence, you can publish.
There's no bruise on your face in this picture either, right?
I disagree. If it is taken when you represent it was taken, then obviously there's a bruise on my face. It's covered by makeup, as per usual.
Dov'è il make-up, scusami?
Let's zoom out of that picture for a moment, please. Thanks, Tom. That's Josh Drew in this picture, right?
È just Drew.
Yes, that's correct.
And Miss Pennington
That is correct.
in there too? Miss
That is
Pennington submitted a sworn statement on your behalf in support of your domestic violence restraining order, didn't she?
I believe she did, yes.
Mr. Drew also submitted a statement in support of your domestic violence restraining order.
I believe they both did, yes. Mhm.
Ms. Heard, I'd like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 512, which is already in evidence.
L'ex marito di lei ha
You've
testimoniato
seen
anche
this
lui.
photograph before, right?
I have.
On the second day of your direct testimony, you testified that this was taken in the downstairs of the main apartment on December 15th, 2015. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I believe so.
So it's your testimony that Defendant's Exhibit 512 reflects damage to Penthouse 5 that occurred during the December 15th, 2015 incident. Yes?
I'm not quite
No,
sure
non lo so.
from what incident this is when I see this photo in a vacuum without context.
Let's give you that context.
Diamoti il contesto,
Can
diamoti il
we,
contesto.
please? Thanks. If I could have day 16 trial testimony.
Lo prendo.
Your Honor, may we approach?
All right.
Arrivo al contesto.
you please turn first to page 4585?
Penso che la smontano adesso, sì. Ragazzi, siamo solo a dicembre, eh.
Specifically starting on line 16, where it says, let's talk about December 15th, 2015.
Parliamo del...
You said 458, I'm on 4485, sorry. You said 4585.
4585.
Pardon.
Pagina
Line 16.
4500. I fazzoletti.
Line 16, where it says, let's talk about December 15th, 2015. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you see that your testimony about December 15th, 2015 follows?
Let's see. It's just the first line or two. Yes.
Okay. Now I'd like you to turn to page 4603. Starting at line 12. 4603. Starting at line 12 and going
Hanno
on
12
to
minuti
page
per il redirect.
4604, line 4.
12 minuti per il redirect.
Okay.
And do you see that you testify that Defendant's Exhibit 512, which is on the screen,
Yes.
is a picture of the downstairs of the main apartment?
That's correct.
And the main apartment is Penthouse 5 in the Eastern Columbia building, right?
No, well, depends on what, the main apartment's penthouse 3 generally when we say main apartment.
Penthouse 5 was where you had your closet?
The downstairs was kind of like had some of my painting studio set up and a reception area. Upstairs was the closet.
Got it.
Mezzanine office was in between.
All right, so it's your testimony that Defendant's Exhibit
Hanno
512
altre
reflects
5
damage
ore,
to the
Mirko.
Penthouse 5, that occurred during the December 15th, 2015 incident, right?
I'm just not sure from which incident this is a picture of, since I'm only looking at
Even
a
though your
partial
counsel
floor.
was asking you questions about December 15th, 2015, and then admitted this picture into evidence
Again,
in relation to that incident.
Sorry, go ahead.
In relation to that incident on December 15th, 2015. This exhibit, Defendant's Exhibit, you are the defendant, number 512,
Giusto per
was
ricordartelo.
admitted into evidence in this court. You testified that this was the result of damage that occurred on December 15th,
Lo sapete che appena lei dice che di dicembre 15 tira fuori metadata, vero?
Because I'm just looking at
Lo sapete che appena lei ammette escono i metadata.
Look at your testimony.
You pointed me towards the page and then asked me a question. I haven't actually reviewed it. I don't know if this was submitted in relation to that incident.
Let's actually leave up Defendant's 512 and please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 725, which is already in evidence.
Thank you.
In redacted form, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You can publish.
Just side by side. You've seen this photograph as well, right?
I have.
On the third day of your direct testimony, you testified that this photograph reflected spilled wine in Penthouse 5 on May 21st, 2016, didn't you?
Again, I don't know because I'm looking at a partial picture of a floor. So unless you remove the metadata you've covered up, we could then tell. If you
I didn't cover it up, Your Honor.
Could we unredact
Your Honor
them so we could get context?
That's how it's in evidence.
That's how it's in evidence.
Next question.
Well, the metadata next to it is so that
Ms.
to
Hurd,
avoid this
Ms.
sort of
Hurd,
confusion.
there is no question pending, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't be making argument to the jury.
Sorry, I
It's
thought you had
inappropriate.
asked me about it.
No, I didn't ask you about anything. Let's look at your direct testimony from the third day.
Ecco chi sembra!
Yes, ma'am.
Salamanca! Salamanca sulla sedia a rotelle!
Thank you.
Let's turn to page 4750
Salamanca, cazzo!
in day 17 transcript.
Sono la stessa foto
4750.
ammessa 2 volte nelle prove per 2 incidenti diversi. La foto, Kaiden.
Specifically line 16. Do you see where Ms. Bredehoff asked you to describe for the jury what took place on May 21st, 2016?
I see that.
Lo
Do you
vedo.
see that your testimony is reflected about May 21, 2015?
Yes.
That follows? Okay.
Yes.
Now let's turn to page 4804. At line 14. 4804. Starting at line 14
Yes.
through 4805, line 4.
Ce l'hai?
Going to what line?
Non so più
Line
leggere,
4
vostro onore,
at
non riesco.
4805. Do you see that you're testifying that defendant's exhibit 725, which is reflected on the right side, reflects spilled wine on the floor in penthouse 5?
That's correct.
Okay, and defendant's exhibit 512 and 725 seem to be different versions of the same picture, don't they?
That's correct.
Okay, so which is it? Which one was taken on December 15th, 2015, or May 21st, 2016?
If you remove the redacted metadata, you can find out.
No.
It's right there.
Or if you're telling the truth, you would know.
Recognize a portion of of spilled wine on a floor, and I'm supposed to know off the top of my head when you've
No.
lived through 5 years of this stuff? I don't think so. That's not how that works.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Ms. Hurd, at the beginning of your cross-examination
Your
last
Honor, may we
week,
approach?
Yes.
Approccia. Questo è tempo che rientra da Johnny Depp. Hanno ancora 5-6 ore di sta roba qua. Quindi una foto è di dicembre del 2015, l'altra è di maggio 2016. Chissà. Non piange più comunque. Non è detto che vadano avanti per così tanto, eh. Se vogliono, sì. Se vogliono la tengo... Allora, la giornata di oggi si conclude alle 23 ore nostre. La difesa ha 12 minuti di tempo. Tutto il resto del tempo è di Johnny Depp.
All right, ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, I would ask that there be no words or no phrases, no words, no
Tolgono
sounds
i
at all
metadata?
coming from you. If I hear one more sound, I will clear the gallery and we will continue this testimony without anybody in the courtroom. Understood? Good. All right, your next question.
Ms. Hurd, at the beginning of your cross-examination last week, I showed you an audio where you told Mr. Depp to tell the jury, tell the judge, tell the world that he is a victim of domestic abuse. Do you remember that?
That's correct.
And you testified you found it hard to believe that Mr. Depp would tell the world that he's a victim of domestic abuse, didn't you?
I said I find it hard to believe that he would do that knowing that he himself had beat me up for 5 years.
But he has told the world that he's your victim of domestic abuse, hasn't he?
Well, he started to say that only recently. He didn't make that claim up until very recently. So when we signed our divorce agreement and we signed a statement saying that neither party had ever said false claims for financial gain, it was relevant and important to me because I was the only one making the accusations. I was the only one making those claims. He wasn't doing that at the time, and he signed his name to it.
You didn't expect as many people to show up and testify on his behalf that did you?
Incorrect.
When you told this jury under oath that you never assaulted, actually, strike that, sorry. When you told this jury under oath that you punched Mr. Depp because you thought of Mr. Depp pushing Kate Moss down the stairs, you didn't expect Miss Moss to agree to testify that that never happened, did you?
Incorrect. I know how many people will come out of the woodwork to be in support of Johnny.
So
It
you
is
think
clear
Ms.
by this
Moss
courtroom
needs
how
to
many
come
people
out
will
of the
do that.
woodwork to testify for Mr. Depp?
Everybody who was around in the 90s and the early aughts knew that rumor. I had heard that rumor from multiple people. Of course, that's
Ha
what
detto
flashed
che
in my
Kate
head when my
Moss aveva
violent
bisogno di
husband
visibilità.
not only swung for me, but all of a sudden swung for my sister. Of course I
Ha
thought
detto
that.
che Kate
I did
Moss
not
aveva
expect
bisogno di
her to show
visibilità.
up or not expect her to show up. It didn't matter. It doesn't change what I believed at the time when we were on the stairs and I thought he was going to kill my sister by pushing her down the stairs.
You told this jury under oath that Mr. Depp was aggressive and trashed a trailer in Hicksville. You didn't expect the manager of the Hicksville property, Morgan Knight, to come forward and testify that that was untrue, did you?
Incorrect. I've already been through trials with this man. I know how many people will come out in support of him.
When you told this jury under oath that you had no idea that the paparazzi would be at the courthouse on May 27th, 2016, you didn't expect a TMZ employee to show up to testify that TMZ had been alerted that you would be at the courthouse and knew exactly which side of your face to take a picture of, did you?
I know how many people will come out and say whatever for him. That's his power. That's why I wrote the op-ed. I was speaking to that phenomenon. How many people will come out in support of him and will fall to his power? He is a very powerful man, and people love currying favor with powerful men.
Currying
and I know
favor
that
and
firsthand. I've
risking
lived
jail
it.
time for committing perjury?
Excuse me?
Te lo ripeto.
I didn't hear your
You
question.
didn't hear
Excuse
my
me?
question?
Ms. Vasquez, if you do mind, please just repeat the question. I didn't hear you.
Curry favor and commit perjury in this courtroom?
I have
For a
seen people
powerful
do this.
man?
I have seen people do this time and time again. That's why I wrote the op-ed.
You didn't expect Ben King, the house manager in Australia, to show up from England. He flew from England to testify that Mr. Depp's fingertip was found exactly where he said it would be. Did you?
I have never heard Johnny testify to knowing where his finger was, or really, frankly, making a claim that he knew where it was when it was found. I've never heard Johnny claim that.
You didn't expect
Johnny
Keenan
doesn't-
Wyatt.
Johnny has never.
Cazzo, l'ha
ever said
ammesso,
that.
Anna.
Ms. Heard.
And
I think the
Ben
jury
King,
can,
yes.
Ms. Heard, there's no question pending. You didn't expect Keenan Wyatt, Mr. Depp's longtime sound technician, to show up and testify that Mr. Depp is not being fed lines through his earpieces, but instead music, did you?
Not that it matters much, but of course I did. I know how his employees treat him.
So you
I know how
probably-
his team treats him. Of course I expected that.
Okay, so you probably expected Isaac Baruch to come and testify for Mr. Depp, right?
I'm not sure I thought about that.
Yeah, but you didn't expect Mr. Baruch to weep for Mr. Depp after what you've put him through and so many others with your lies.
I
did you?
relate to Isaac because he and I are
There's
the
no
only
further
ones who
questions, Your
cried
Honor.
on this stand.
Nothing further.
All right. Redirect.
12 minuti.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Vai,
Ms. Heard,
Rottenborn.
if Mr. Baruch felt misled, who misled him?
Johnny, and I don't blame him. I don't blame him from crying. This is horrible.
Ms. Vasquez has suggested
È
that you
cambiato
faked bruises
il
on your
tono.
face. Is that true?
Absolutely not. I didn't need to.
Did you ever fake an injury caused by Mr. Depp?
No.
Is any of the evidence of your injuries that has been put to the jury in this trial fake?
No, absolutely not.
And to the extent that there may be some confusion over when a picture of spilled wine was taken, why might that be?
Objection,
Because there's so
lack of
many-
foundation.
Overruled.
Because there's so many incidents of violence. There's so many pictures. There's so much evidence. Most people don't have this kind of evidence for years, 5 years. And when I was saying that to Johnny on the phone in that recording, I was saying for years this has been going on. And I have pictures, we have texts, we have everything. Normally you don't get this amount of evidence. That's what I was pointing out to Johnny. It would be crazy to try to challenge this in this way. It's crazy. It's easy to not know the context of a picture of spilled wine because there are so many more important details, pictures, and also so much I didn't photograph, so much I didn't have the presence
Objection,
of mind to
non-responsive.
document.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Did Mr. Depp abuse you physically?
Yes.
Sì.
Verbally?
Yes.
Emotionally?
Yes.
Psychologically?
Yes.
Yes.
How did the threats that Mr. Depp made against you individually years ago resemble what you've endured as a result of the Depp-Waldman statements?
Beyond the scope of cross, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Johnny promised me he would ruin me, that he'd ruin my career, he'd take my life from me. Death was the only way out, and if I got out, this is what he'd do to me. He'd make me think of him every single day. He promised me global humiliation. You saw those texts. What he couldn't do, the work of one individual, meaning Johnny.
Ce la fanno.
Inviting a disgruntled employee over for a spot of purple to fix my flabby ass up. That revenge that he sought back then was just what he could do as an individual, calling the studio to get me fired, trying to block him.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation, speculation, hearsay, non-responsive.
I'll sustain as to non-responsive.
Ms. Heard, how did those things that you just testified to that Mr. Depp did, how did those resemble what happened to you after the Depp-Waldman counterclaim statements were made?
Well, those are
Objection, Your
just,
Honor. Lack of foundation.
She's
overruled.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
those are just an echo of what I'm living through today. It's like what I'm living in right now. What you see in this courtroom is an echo. This courtroom and the other courtroom he dragged me into to do the same thing again. That's just an echo of the violence and the abuse that I suffered within our relationship. The campaigns to have me fired, the blocking me to try to ruin my career, the threats he's made to humiliate me globally are being lived out in real time in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, for the past 6 weeks and for the whole world since our camera's here.
No further questions. Thank you so much, Amber.
All right, Ms. Heard, you can have a seat next to your attorneys.
8 minuti rimasti. Hanno finito però.
If I could have the attorneys approach.
Io mi chiedo. Minchia come l'ha guardata. Io mi chiedo. Chi può crederle? Chi, ragazzi?
Salve ragazzi, sapete che comprime l'abbonamento è gratis? Incredibile, impressionante.
Grazie Bearded King della marchetta per ricordare a tutti quanti che sì, se non volete vedere le pubblicità e avete Amazon Prime, avete un abbonamento Prime gratis. Grazie della marchettata. Incredibile, impressionante. Grazie. Grazie. Vuoi tornare dietro secondi? Yes. Lei la guarda? Lei la guarda? Boom! Target locked! Grazie a Cicapuff del Prime, grazie a Quaternione dei 5 mesi di Prime. Visto? Grazie King. Tocca!
Grazie, mi hai ricordato che il mio era scaduto.
L'op-ed opinion editorial, credo che sia, insomma, l'articolo. Step on the B è stata una dichiarazione che ha fatto lei.
The counterclaimant Amber Heard rests.
All right.
Per
thank you,
forza,
ma'am.
non c'è più un caso.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard all the evidence you're going to hear in this matter. What I propose doing is to go ahead and give you the rest of the afternoon off so you can have a good restful afternoon and evening, and we will do closing arguments tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and then the case will be submitted to you for deliberations. Just to give you a little logistics of how that will go, tomorrow I won't give you a time limit as far as how long you can deliberate in the afternoon into the evening. I will tell you, within reason, I will tell you I do not serve dinner, so keep that in mind, okay? You will not be deliberating on Saturday or Sunday or Monday, because Monday is a holiday. I would like you to have you back here Tuesday morning, at least by 9 o'clock. If you want to come earlier, that's up to you. You can decide as a group if you want to come earlier than 9 o'clock, but you have to be here at least by 9 o'clock to resume your deliberations again. And again on Tuesday night, and if you have to go to Wednesday or Thursday, that the time that when you take your breaks is up to you, as long as you take them together, as far as not having any deliberations unless all of the jurors are in the room at the same time. When you take your lunch is up to you. And then again in the evening, within reason, I'll let you go as long as you'd like to go, okay? So have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning, okay? Do not discuss the case with anybody. Don't do any outside research.
Give up hanno 5 ore? Sì, non gli servono.
All right. We'll go ahead and take a modified lunch recess just till 12:50. We'll come back at 12:50. We just have a few jury instructions left we have to do. Make sure we get the verdict form taken care of. I want you to review the laptop that we have mocked up and make sure everybody agrees what's on it. And also I want you to look through all your exhibits and make sure we're all on the same page before you leave. I'll make sure you have copies of the jury instructions in the order that I'm going to read them, and you should be able to prepare for your closing arguments for tomorrow, okay? All right, we'll see you at 12:50 then.
Ok, ragazzi, io vi propongo di non seguire più il processo questa sera, quindi piuttosto ci facciamo una pausa un po' più lunga anche noi e questa sera vediamo che cosa fare. Propongo di non seguirlo perché tanto ormai è finito, la parte dei testimoni è finita. Mi puoi dire ora cosa è successo in quest'ultima testimonianza? Ha parlato Amber, ma allora, quello che ha fatto lei con i suoi avvocati è stato fare la classica testimonianza finale, quella che ha fatto del resto anche Johnny Depp, cioè l'ultimo disperato tentativo di convincere la giuria. Ma dopodiché abbiamo visto invece una distruzione totale da parte di Camille, che non ha retto alle sue palle e gli ha detto, cioè che non ha creduto alle balle di Amber e gli ha smontato diversi claim che ha fatto. Insomma, uno dopo l'altro gli ha tolto tante delle cose su cui finora c'era una certezza per quanto riguarda le dichiarazioni di lei. Grande squadra, ma magari anche prima. Stasera cosa farebbero? Niente, ormai la parte delle testimonianze è conclusa, manca la parte di organizzazione della giuria. Domani mattina che però per noi saranno le 3, poi c'è l'evasion. Spero di riuscire a fare in tempo, spero che le arringhe finali non durino 5 ore, spero che durino un'oretta. Comunque, devono poi adesso solo più roba di avvocati, cioè sono gli avvocati ora che dovranno poi discutere fra di loro, controllare che tutte le prove siano a posto, che non ci siano errori, che il portatile con le prove che danno alla giuria sia corretto, insomma sono burocrazia adesso. Ci sarebbe anche L.A. Noire se l'ho scaricato, è vero c'è L.A. Noire, però volevo giocarlo la prossima settimana. Un'ora ad avvocato? L'Evasion so che inizia alle 18, io forse inizierò un po' prima per la stream dell'Evasion, sicuramente però sarò qui dalle 3 per questa roba qua, invece. Quindi 3, 4, 5, potrebbe essere che ci stiamo, dicevo, ci sono diversi incidenti, allora il discorso è questo. Johnny Depp l'ha citata per diffamazione, Amber Heard per dire che le cose che ha scritto in quell'articolo sono vere, ha descritto diversi incidenti. I più gravi sono l'incidente di Hicksville del 2013, se non sbaglio, 2013, Hicksville Incident, dove appunto lui l'ha perquisita corporalmente per le droghe, ha picchiato i presenti, insomma, violenza sui presenti, eccetera. Poi c'è stato l'incidente, non voglio sbagliarmi con le date, c'è stato l'incidente del dicembre 2015, che era quello dello naso spaccato a testate, occhi neri, labbro spaccato, capelli strappati, pugno alla tempia, e lei il giorno dopo ha fatto un'intervista dove era perfetta. C'è stato ovviamente anche l'ordine restrittivo, dove lei aveva il livido solo il giorno dell'ordine restrittivo. C'è stato il maggio del 2015, che è l'incidente delle scale, e credo di aver finito. Credo di aver finito. Ah, il dito in Australia, giusto? La ringa dell'avvocato Kilner, che cosa diresti? Ma in un caso del genere, la ringa che farei sarebbe questa. Fine della ringa. Cosa devi dire? Cosa devi dire a una cosa del genere? Un'ora di questo? Che cacchio vuoi dire? Viene cabile, ma che cacchio devi dire? Scusa, un'ora di questo, ma 10 minuti, ma non... Massimo un'ora, poi si vedrà che cosa fanno. Allora, fatemi vedere intanto altre cose. Hmm. Bene. Stavo guardando, come l'avvocato Fabio De Giacomo in studio. Stavo guardando che abbiamo un bel picco di spettatori e mi dispiace concludere qui, ma penso proprio che concluderò qui e siccome appunto per 2 settimane ci siamo sparati 11 ore di live al giorno, approfitto di questo momento di pausa per farmi una pausetta, ci rivediamo magari verso le 8:30, 9, una cosa del genere, per la nostra stream serale. Partecipo all'Evasion domani, Panti, con Cante Frene. Quindi, vado a prendermi un paio d'ore di riposo. Contento di avervi fatto il riassunto di tutto quanto, contento del supporto ricevuto, contento di tutto quanto, di come è andato questo processo, perché per quanto mi riguarda mi ha dimostrato che ci sono anche altre opportunità di creare contenuto al di fuori del solito, e questo mi fa molto 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 piacere. Appunto, prossima settimana giocheremo L.A. Noire per riprendere questa parte investigativa. Io adesso vado a riposarmi, fatelo anche voi, ci rivediamo stasera.